Chapter 1 of The Quiet Flame, Mother Mary Ann of Molokai. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maria Therese. The Quiet Flame, Mother Mary Ann of Molokai by Eva K. Betz. Chapter 1. Barbara Kopp. Soup, Barbara? Barbara smiled. Yes, soup. Do you like it? I do when you make it. Matthew threw his hat on a chair, but a quick glance from his sister made him hastily snatch it up. I'll hang it in the hall, he assured her. Don't glare at me. Barbara's eyes twinkled with humor, and she had to work to control the lovely mouth which wanted to smile. Of course you will, she said, as if she had expected it all the time. Then will you get some wood for the stove, please? It's almost gone. Matthew lumbered out to the woodshed, wondering as he did so why he never argued with his sister. There was something about her, he decided, that made people want to oblige her. And she does plenty for us, he admitted honestly, as he split a chunky branch into stove lengths. Some people might have felt that young Barbara Kopp was carrying too heavy a load for her frail shoulders, but such an idea never occurred to the girl herself. When her mother died, it was obvious to Barbara that she, the oldest girl, should take over running the house and keep the family together. Family was an important word to the Kopps. Barbara, born in 1836, had been less than 2 years old when her parents decided to leave their home in Hesse Darmstadt near the Rhine and come to America to seek their fortune. But she had grown up hearing tales of the little peaked roofed houses which made up the forest-skirted villages. Her expressive eyes grew wide as her mother told her tales of her people, their homes, their farms, and their affection for each other. Her father's tales were more roistering. He told of tricks played on other boys, of mountain days in snow and wind, and as Barbara grew up in their Utica, New York home, it was not unknown for her to try some of these tricks herself. She was a sunny child, bubbling with laughter, yet with a deeply serious side to her nature, and, above all, she was kind. 2 brothers, Matthew and John, had been born to the Kopps, and 3 more girls, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Eva. So when the mother died, Barbara had a full schedule before her. But with her own family, and with neighbors' children as well, she always had time to bandage cuts and listen to small woes. "I declare, that child is just made of love!" a neighbor exclaimed as she saw Barbara doing some little kindness. "She's a good little housekeeper, too," added her friend, "but she does have some strange ideas." "Yes? Like what?" The second speaker was hanging out a wash, and before answering she paused to remove some clothespins from her mouth. "My Mary was over there to supper last night, and Barbara had a glass with some flowers in it right on the table, in the middle." The second woman considered for a moment. "Do you know, I think they might look real pretty. That girl has a way with flowers." Barbara did indeed have a way with flowers. She grew some, she picked wild flowers to bring home, and she loved them all. In saying that she was made of love, her neighbor had not been so far wrong. First and foremost, Barbara loved God, and it followed that she loved everything He had made, the things made for people's delight as well as people themselves. She wasn't quite sure when the idea first came to her that she wanted to give her life to Him. Perhaps she had seen Mother Bernardine making her rounds. In lieu of a hospital, the Sisters of St. Francis nursed the sick in their homes, and between fumes from the nearby brewery and smoke from the railroad, there was a good deal of sickness on Schuyler Street where the Kopps lived. She was not sure what had planted in her heart the longing to be a nun, but it was there. She hugged the secret to herself, rejoicing that for some reason God had chosen her, and she looked forward with joy to the time when she would be grown up enough to enter the convent. Then her mother died. Poor Peter Kopp was lost. He had loved his wife and depended on her, and the world was bewildering without her. He was hardly aware of the skill with which his daughter Barbara took over the care of the house. The other boys and girls were frightened. Mother had always been there as firm as a rock and as soft as a cloud. They could conceive of the sun falling from the sky as readily as their mother leaving them. Unobtrusively, Barbara gathered the reins in her hands. She did not try to take her mother's place. No one, she knew, ever replaces another. But she built a rule for herself, and, long before the family realized it, life was running smoothly, and Barbara was the reason. It wasn't easy. A mother is born with patience. She is able to accept the quick temper of one child and the dreaminess of the next. She knows instinctively how to discount the emotional exaggerations of a little girl and to listen with care to the hard expressed thoughts of her son. But Barbara was only a sister, and she had to learn all those skills the hard way. There were some things she accepted at once, such as the fact that little girls who were bitterest enemies one day might be best friends the next. And she realized that just as surely as the sun draws tidal waters, horses draw small boys. There was something unarguable, inexorable about the attraction. When one of the boys who had been told to come straight home from school didn't do so, she automatically gave directions. "Run down to the brewery stables and get your brother." She found it easy to sympathize with his infatuation. She herself loved to watch the powerful dray horses when they hauled the wagon piled with heavy casks. The ripple of their muscles under their well-groomed coats, the clang of their shoes striking sparks from the cobbled streets, were entertainment of the highest order. But though her heart understood the temptation for her brothers, her mind said that the boys must learn to obey. "There are rules for everyone," she pointed out, "and we must all learn to respect them." "Does Papa have rules?" "Of course he does. How do you suppose sidewalks could be laid and curbstones set if the men worked only how and when they wanted to?" Matthew looked thoughtful. "Do you have rules?" he asked. "Oh, Matthew!" Barbara's laugh cascaded irrepressibly. "Suppose that tomorrow I stay in bed late and don't make breakfast for you all. Then when I make soup I'll put in sugar instead of salt. And when I bake a cake I'll use a cup of salt instead of sugar. At supper." "I guess everybody has rules," John agreed sadly. "It hardly seems worth while growing up." In Barbara's heart was always the longing to enter the convent. Rules there were that she yearned to be guided by. But it was plain to her that for the time being at any rate her duty was at home. And always, what she was supposed to do, she did, and did well. Best of all, there was nothing of the long-faced martyr about her. She loved life and enjoyed every bit of it. There was laughter in the Kopp home and gaiety. She planned picnics for the children and simple outings. There was no money for frivolities, but who needed money? They picked wildflowers to decorate the cemetery in the spring. Barbara took them to watch other people's fireworks on the 4th of July. And, amid shrieks of laughter, she taught them to use barrel staves for snowshoes when winter set in. She was mother and sister and wonderful playfellow all in one. She skillfully managed questions of discipline, which sometimes arose when she shifted rules. The sweetness of her nature and the strength of her character allowed her to direct as well as play. She saw them through school and through their first faltering love affairs. None of them seemed to find it strange that she had no love affair of her own, for none of them was aware that her heart had long ago been given to Christ, that within her burned a quiet flame that would be satisfied only when she was inside convent walls. At last the children were grown and scattered. Mr. Kopp died, and, at 26, Barbara joined the Sisters of St. Francis in Syracuse. She was professed the following year, 1863, and called Sister Mary Ann. Her own family had taught her how to deal with children, so teaching, her first assignment as a nun, was a joy to her. It was a joy to her classes, too. Sister said, as children always report, often had an addition. Sister Mary Ann laughed out loud. She had been little more than a decade in the Order when she was appointed Superior of St. Joseph's Hospital in Syracuse. Just as little Barbara Kopp had gathered the frayed threads of her household and made a home, so Mother Mary Ann moved the diocesan activities of caring for the sick into a well-administered hospital. 2 years later she was unanimously elected Provincial Superior, and when her term was up she was re-elected. Now her days were indeed filled. Her calmness and good sense forbade any appearance of hustle or bustle, and to see her in chapel might convey the feeling that she belonged to a contemplative order. As a girl she had walked down to pay a visit to the church as often as she could. Now her joy was in the chapel, where she could lose herself in talk with her beloved. But all the houses in the province were demanding her care, her advice, her opinions. It was for her to say if this move was advisable, if that step should be postponed. The schools would be closing before long, and many matters were waiting on her decision. She was at her desk studying the problems, waiting solution, when the Sister Portress knocked at her door. "Mother," she said, "I don't like to disturb you, but there's a priest downstairs. Father Leonore, his name is, and he comes from Molokai. He is most anxious to see you." "Father Leonore? From Molokai? I wonder what he wants. Did he say?" "No, Mother, just that he wanted to talk with you." Mother thoughtfully made a neat little pile out of the papers on which she had been working. "Well, there's one way I can find out what he wants, isn't there, Sister?" Mother's eyes sparkled with her ready laughter. "Instead of just sitting here wondering, I can go down and see him." She walked slowly down the stairs, part of her mind still back at her desk. But when she had entered the parlor and listened for a few minutes to the visiting priest, her mind was wrapped up in a completely new problem. The fate of many people would hang on that conversation. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of A Quiet Flame, Mother Mary Ann of Molokai by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 2. A Plea is Granted. Father Leonore could still not believe it. He had finished his Thanksgiving after Mass, and now he knelt quietly in the chapel trying to assure himself that the good news was really coming. For wearying weeks he had tried to get nuns to work with the lepers in the Hawaiian Islands. He had written to convents, and less than half had even answered his plea. He had called at mother houses from coast to coast without success. "We have too few Sisters for all the work awaiting us here," he had been told. Or, "We could not let our Sisters go to sure death in that dreadful place." In vain he had explained that the conditions were quite different now from those Father Damian had faced on his arrival. In vain he had pointed out that the need for nursing and teaching Sisters was heartbreakingly great in the Islands. "I am sure it is, Father," each Superior had agreed, "but there is need here, too, and here the Sisters under my care will be safe." When almost at the end of his hope he had gone to the vine-covered little convent built of stone, he had no idea it might be the end of his search. When, almost at the end of hope, he had gone to the vine-covered little convent built of stone, he had no idea it might be the end of his search. The name Sisters of the Third Order of St. Francis meant nothing special to him when he directed his steps towards the Mother House in Syracuse, New York. He had visited so many cities, so many Mother Houses. He could not stay away much longer from his duties in the Islands. If Mother Mary Ann said "no," he must give up. Now as he knelt in the chapel his mind went back to their meeting the previous day. He tried to visualize the nun. He could not remember whether she was tall or short. All he could remember was her eyes. Misted with pity when he spoke of the need and tragedy of the lepers, they had hardened and flashed when he told of indignities and injustices shown the sufferers. Her eyes had sparkled with appreciation when he spoke of schools for the boys and girls. They had spilled over with laughter when he told her of amusing incidents on the Islands. How big was she? What did she look like? No detail of her physical appearance stayed with him. But her soul was great, of that he was sure, and her mind was quick to grasp the fact that the sick of the Islands were in desperate need of the help and care only Sisters could give. "I will present your plea to the Council, Father," she had said at the close of their visit. "The decision is not mine alone, you know." Father Leonore dragged his wandering thoughts back to the altar. With all his heart he prayed that the answer would be "yes." He was quite sure it would be so if Mother Mary Ann's voice was heard. The next day all of the Sisters and the novices were gathered to hear Father Leonore tell of conditions in the Islands and of the work waiting to be done there. "Mother Mary Ann has given me great hope that here, in Syracuse, my search will be ended." He looked about the chapel, seeming to seek out each separate face and to plead with the mind and heart behind it. The next day Sister Bonaventure went through the convent asking for the names of those who were ready to volunteer for the work in the leper colony. Most of the nuns and nearly all of the novices wanted to go. "We can spare only 6," said Mother Mary Ann. "That will be 7 in all, because I will lead the band." Mother's background for the work was perfect. She had taught school for some time after her profession, an asset to one planning educational work on the Islands. She had been in charge of St. Joseph's Hospital in Syracuse. As Mother Provincial of her community, she had learned to deal with people and with problems. By her varied experience, she seemed to have been ordained to take on the new task. Over and above these assets there was a quality which marked her as a leader. Under her tender kindness there was iron. Despite her physical frailty, she had drive. Whatever came to her hand to do, she did as perfectly as possible, and she expected those who worked with her to do the same. They would not do otherwise, for almost everyone who came within her orbit was drawn to her with an admiring affection which made them very eager to win her approval. It was late spring when Father Leonor got her promise of help. His task done, he went back to the islands, where he was Provincial of the Fathers of the Sacred Hearts. In Syracuse the summer was spent in preparation for the departure. Those who were going, with the exception of Mother Mary Ann, did not expect to return. Each had duties where she was, duties which must be apportioned out to others who would absorb the extra load. When, in 1872, Father Damien went to live on Molokai, the leper colony was a dreadful place. There was no resident to care for the poor sufferers, either physically or spiritually, and condition of body and soul were unspeakable. The good Belgian priest worked alone for years. Bit by bit he made changes, but the progress seemed to him to be dishearteningly slow. "There is so little time," was his constant cry. "So much to do and so little time." Help came. Other priests and 2 laymen joined him in his heroic work. But he longed for Sisters both for the hospital and to take care of the babies and young girls. It was discovered that if the children of leprous parents were taken from them early enough, the little ones would grow up free of the disease. But there must be Sisters to tend them. Everyone agreed to that: the Hawaiian King and Queen, Mr. Gibson, Chairman of the Board of Health, Bishop Maigret of the Islands. It was the latter who sent Father Leonor on his search, and he, as well as all the others, was delighted when the priest returned with word that the search had been successful. Arrangements were made for accommodations for the Sisters when they should come. Then Father Leonor returned to his regular duties. "Time seems to be acting strangely, Mother," one of the Sisters said to Mother Mary Ann as the summer of 1883 drew to its close. "How do you mean, Sister?" "It's rushing. I don't see how I am ever going to finish up all the things I must do before I leave." Mother Mary Ann nodded. "Yet at the same time," Sister Lodovica continued, "it seems so long before we get started toward our work." Mother's eyes twinkled. "I know, Sister, I feel the same. And it's disconcerting, isn't it? But taking you each day as it comes, and then you'll be ready when departure day comes." "You'll come back, won't you, Mother?" asked another nun who had come down the hall. "You won't just go off and leave us? We couldn't get along without you." "Nonsense! Of course you can get along without me. Very well, too. However, I have told you many times that I'll come back." From spring to fall had looked like plenty of time, but when October 23 arrived there was scurrying. Last-minute messages had to be given before the little band climbed on the train in Syracuse Station. Final farewells were to be said. And all over again promises were extracted from Mother Mary Ann, assurances that this was not a final leave taking. The nuns disposed themselves on the sticky, plush seats, and as the engine belched cinder and sparks, they waved to the little group on the platform. Human, reasonable fear combined with exultation in their hearts. Each prayed that in the time of trial toward which she was going, she would not be found wanting. Mother Mary Ann looked about her, a good commander surveying her troops. All the Sisters who should be here were here. Their baggage had been taken care of. She had delegated duties in Syracuse, apportioning them skillfully so that no one would have an impossibly heavy load to carry. Her own bag with purse and paper had been left behind. Other people in a similar predicament might have been distressingly embarrassed at what could have been considered carelessness. Not Mother. She never considered herself anything but very poorly human. She reported to her Sisters. "I will get off at Buffalo," she said, "and take a fast train to Syracuse. Then I'll take a fast train to Chicago and meet you at the station there." Matters were explained to the conductor. Slim assets were pooled to take care of the unexpected train trip, and before secret tears were fairly dry in Syracuse, The bell rang at the convent. "See," chuckled Mother Mary Ann to the astounded portress, "I told you I'd be back. So here I am." Explaining as she went, she hurried to her room, got her bag, and, before the confused Sisters really grasped what was going on, was back at the railroad station. A fast train got her to Chicago almost as soon as the rest of the band. It was late night when the tired little party reached San Francisco. They were grateful that 2 convents were ready to receive them and to offer them homes during the wait before sailing on the little ship Mariposa, heading for the unknown. 2,000 miles of Pacific lay before them. And then what? Who knew? The sun had begun its downward trip when the little ship slid out the Golden Gate late on a Thursday afternoon, gulls wheeled screaming overhead, their whitish breasts taking fire from the reflection of sun-painted water. November 2nd. Winter had probably already begun to lay hands on the landscape of Syracuse, but here all was balmy and serene. Balmy perhaps, but not serene. They were barely out of the harbor when the Pacific began rolling and tossing the Mariposa about until it seemed to the Sisters that it must be a helpless toy of the mighty ocean. They all became dreadfully seasick. As suddenly as the malady had descended on them, it left them. By the 3rd day they had all become sailors, all except poor Mother Mary Ann, who remained quite ill and unable to go out to enjoy the immensity of sky and ocean. It was confusing, especially to the younger Sisters. They relied so on Mother's determination and willpower to overcome all obstacles, but seasickness she could not defeat. Day after day passed. The Mariposa seemed to be alone in the world, to have the wide ocean all to herself. Then, as they neared the islands on the Wednesday after they had left San Francisco, a yacht rushed toward them and hove to. Who is it? What's going on? What do they want? The nuns on deck were curious and excited. "They are flying the Royal Hawaiian colors," a sailor who stood near them explained. "Perhaps one of the royal family is taking a cruise, but I don't know what they want of us. They didn't seem to be in any trouble, judging from the speed they made coming alongside." Even as he was speaking, one of the officers on the yacht had raised a megaphone to his lips and hailed the ship. Greetings and identifications were exchanged. Then came a question. "You have the Sisters aboard?" "We do," was the answer. That seemed to finish the yacht's business. It swung smartly about and headed back toward Honolulu, wide white wings of foam forming on either side of its prow. The Mariposa plodded along in the yacht's wake. The Sisters reported excitedly to each other that Father Leonore was on the yacht. On November 8th the Mariposa entered Honolulu harbor. It drew alongside the wharf and let down the gangplank. At once a clangor of bells broke out, great bells and tiny ones, deep-toned and shrill ones. All the bells of Honolulu rang a welcome to the Sisters who had come to help. Masses of people milled in the streets and around the 4 royal carriages sent to carry the Sisters. "Queen Kapiolani is not well," said a handsome woman who had stepped out of the crowd to greet Mother Mary Ann. "She could not come in person to welcome you, so she sent me, her First Lady in Waiting, to convey her welcome." The Sisters were stunned. Their whole religious life was founded on poverty and simplicity. A greeting such as might be given a reigning monarch was a trifle overwhelming. But Mother Mary Ann, with the simplicity of true greatness, accepted the greeting and then climbed into the carriage assigned to her, her Sisters following in the others. With the bells still pealing wildly overhead and tumultuous crowds cheering along the way, the carriage went up one street and down the other in a winding, triumphal tour. They reached the cathedral. The bishop in his grandest robes was on the steps to bless and welcome them. Priests, brothers, servers were crowded around. It was hard for the Sisters to adjust. A few devoted nuns had left their quiet convent in New York State to travel half around the world to help some sufferers. But it was an opportunity to be of service, and it was they who should be grateful, they felt. They were moved and deeply appreciative of the reception and the beautiful Thanksgiving service arranged at the cathedral, but they were eager to get to work. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of The Quiet Flame, Mother Mary Ann of Molokai by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 3. Trial by Ocean. By January 1884 the convent at Branch Hospital was finished. The nuns put their bags upstairs. The wagon with their trunks would follow, and Mother looked about her. "We'd better get started," she said. On their arrival in Honolulu they had been told that their first post would be Branch Hospital, a leprosarium a few miles outside the city. They were to wait in town until their house at the hospital was built. The day after their arrival on the island, the King and Queen had come to call. Kind Mr. Gibson, Chairman of the Board of Health, acted as interpreter. Formal greetings were exchanged. Then the Queen spoke, and as her words were repeated in English, she stood tall and regal, unembarrassed by the tears streaming down her face. "The Queen's words are these," said Mr. Gibson. "I love you. You have left your home and country, and come to these faraway islands to care for my poor afflicted children. I shall never forget you. You are my sisters, and I will always love you." Mr. Gibson's own voice was a little husky as he delivered the message, and his eyes were suspiciously bright. Mother Mary Ann, too, was moved, and found it hard for a moment to voice her appreciation of the royal welcome. It had made them even more eager, if that was possible, to begin their work. As soon as it could be arranged they had gone to see the hospital where they were to be stationed. They had been stunned and horrified by the dirt and depravity they found. "No one should be asked to stay in such surroundings," said Mother angrily. "Especially poor, sick people whose last home it would be. We must make changes there, Sister." Now the time of waiting was over and the nuns were there. Mother pinned back her wide outer sleeves and rolled up the inner ones. The Sisters followed suit. "I suppose the hospital kitchen will be the best place to start." The cook stood open-mouthed as the nuns descended on the place. He was completely bewildered as they scrubbed and scoured and disinfected his bug-infested domain. It was likely that, in all his time there, he had never seen the wood of the floor before. "It must have taken years and years of neglect to achieve this dirt," said Mother grimly. "Now the dining room, Mother?" asked Sister Antonella. "Yes, if we can fight our way through the flies." Mr. Van Geesen, superintendent of the hospital, watched the frenzy of cleaning with cold amusement. He ran the place to suit himself, not for the comfort of the patients, and he had no welcome for these interfering women. There was drunkenness, gambling, and immorality in the place, but so long as nothing broke out into the open, he did not mind. With the giant Tom Birch and a few other men who fawned on him, he kept order enough to suit himself, and he did not plan on having any disturbance of his way of life. Mother Mary Ann realized the situation. She was gentle and loving, but she could be as firm as steel when she knew she was right. She, too, did not plan to accept interference in her work. "We'll do what we came to do," she said to the Sisters with calm determination. "We will dress sores and nurse the sick and try to bring cleanliness and order into the place. Cleanliness of both body and soul." It didn't take long for most of the patients to respond to the goodness and tenderness of the "white fellow ladies." There were a few, of course, who felt with the superintendent that the nuns were intruding and feared they would erase gambling and drink. Sometimes on meeting this resentment the Sisters would be frightened or discouraged, but with a little joke or an encouraging word Mother Mary Ann could set things right. It was tedious, exhausting work, this changing a whole way of living, especially when it was combined with the most difficult and distasteful sort of nursing, but under Mother's guidance they were making progress. Then the shock came. The morning mail had been delivered, and in it was an official-looking letter for Mother. Curious as to what the government might have to say, she opened it at once. "This is surprising." Her voice was low and tense. "Surprising, Mother?" Sister Lodovica was clearing the breakfast table and gave only half her mind to the conversation, but Mother's next words startled her into full attention. "Yes, my letter is from Mr. Gibson. A new hospital has been built at Maui, and it is the Queen's wish that I should take charge." A fork and spoon fell from Sister's nerveless hand and hit the table with a clatter. "But you can't, Mother! We're hardly established here. They can't take you away. We can't manage without you." "Such a lot of can'ts, and all of them wrong." Mother's eyes twinkled and her mouth curled in its funny, quirky smile. Then her face became sober and tender. "I can leave because I must," she said gently. "I must be obedient to authority, you know. And you will manage very well. Just lean on God." So once again Mother Mary Ann had to plan the disposition of her forces. Sister Renata and Sister Antonella would go with her to Maui to take charge of the hospital. She instructed Sisters Rosalie, Bonaventure, and Crescentia in what they should do until she came back. Although the morning of the sailing was bright and clear, poor Mother Mary Ann got sick as soon as she saw the little ship which was to take them to Maui. Dancing waves were sun-tipped, and the small fore and aft schooner bobbed with a motion that delighted everyone but Mother. But in mid-afternoon, after the sudden fashion of the tropics, the sky grew overcast, a boisterous wind sprang up, and a fine, driving rain set in. Now the waves that lashed the ship were spume-topped, and Mother had company in her misery. Everyone was grateful when in the late afternoon they reached the comparative shelter of Maliai Bay and dropped anchor. A small boat was put over the side to ferry the passengers ashore. It looked quite easy when the crew scampered down the short rope ladder and stepped into the boat. The Sisters also found no difficulty. But something happened when Mother Mary Ann tried. The two crafts might appear to be quite close together, but as soon as she put out a foot it seemed that one rolled to starboard and the other pitched to port. The result was a gap too wide for her to span. The two Sisters alternately prayed and called directions. Mother grew exasperated with herself. The others had boarded the boat safely. Then so would she. "Now, Mother! Now!" the two voices called. With the help of God and the guiding hands of two strong sailors, Mother Mary Ann launched herself into the void. To her pleased surprise, she found herself safe in the rowboat. By now black dark had settled on the waters and the tide was running strong. In spite of their most violent efforts, the oarsmen could not bring the craft ashore. In fact, they were fighting a losing battle and were being carried out into the open sea. The three nuns did not make a sound. Hawaiian men were excellent seamen, they knew. If anyone could get the boat in, they could. So Mother and the two Sisters remained silent, helping all they could in the only way they could, by praying. The storm headed the boat seaward again. When the oarsmen pulled it about, a great wave slapped it broadside, almost capsizing it. Everyone was drenched by sea water added to the rain. A cold, penetrating wind made their misery greater. The rowboat had shipped a good deal of water. The nuns didn't know whether it was a dangerous amount, but they did know it was making their shoes soggy and clammy. Hunched over, making themselves as small as they could against the icy rain, they prayed and watched the heroic struggle of the men at the oars. At last, it was nearly midnight, one of the boys panted out welcome words: "The landing!" The nuns, of course, were delighted, but they soon learned that danger was not completely behind them, for this landing was no steady wooden pier, but a stone jetty. It was without guard rails, and walking over the water-covered, weed-slippery boulders with driving rain blinding them while the wind tore at their habits was a hazardous and exhausting experience. But Hawaiians love courage, and the boys gave all the help they could to the weary women. Father Gulston, priest of Maui, was there to meet them and solicitously tuck them into the carriage he had waiting. It was wonderful to be on land again, firm, safe, steady land. "It's a 7-mile drive to the hospital," Father Gulston told them. "It will not take us too long." "Too long," the nuns learned, was rather an ambiguous phrase. And the land over which they rode was far from firm and safe and steady. They were inclined to wonder, during the trip, if they were really on the road or if Father was going cross country. The carriage banged over tree roots and pitched into holes. It grated against boulders and almost bogged down in the mire. And all the time the wind howled and the rain lashed the cold, hungry Sisters. The next morning when Mother looked out of the windows she found it hard to believe in the tempest they had endured just the night before. Trees swayed gently in the warm breeze and the old mission church nearby basked in a kindly sun. Mother was the only one able to go to Mass that morning. The two Sisters were prostrated by the hardships of the trip, but she, the fragile one, heard Mass and then looked over the surroundings of the new 2-story hospital. The building fronted the ocean, a well-behaved ocean that day, with far-off steamers trailing smoke across the horizon. On either side were vast fields of sugar cane and taro, lush and green and promising. When Mother went to the back of the building, she caught her breath, for there the extinct volcano Haleakala seemed to be tapping its snowy cap against the sky. "It's so close," thought Mother, "I believe a well-thrown rock would land on the side of the mountain." She learned later that it was 40 miles away. But she had more to do than to think of chucking stones at mountains. There were many plans to be made and executed before the hospital could be put in operation. Between the hospital building and the church there was a school building. "I'll put Sister Antonella in charge of that," she decided. "She is so fond of children, she will do well with the school, I am sure." It was hard for her to leave the incredible loveliness of the outdoors which was on all sides as she walked back to the hospital, busy with plans. The furniture was in, she had seen, but sheets and pillowcases and towels and gowns and the 1,001 other necessary items were still waiting. With the generous help of groups of Hawaiian women, the hospital was ready to receive patients in an amazingly short time. Shortly after operations began, Mother received word that the Queen was to visit the island and, of course, the new hospital. Mr. Gibson called to tell her of the impending visit. "Don't you think it would be gracious to ask Her Majesty to name the hospital?" Mr. Gibson suggested. "What a happy thought!" Mother Mary Ann was delighted with the idea. "I'll send a note at once." "Why not wait until she has seen all that you have accomplished here?" asked Mr. Gibson. "It will delight her, I know, and she will be even more complimented by the request." The Queen came and under Mother's guidance saw every bit of the hospital. She went through the kitchens and inspected the linen rooms. She admired the little offices as well as the patients' rooms. Mother Mary Ann's determination on scrupulous cleanliness, combined with her feminine ability in homemaking, made the hospital all that could be desired. "Her Majesty is very happy indeed," Mr. Gibson translated as the Queen was leaving. "She wants me to say that she would be grateful to be allowed to help. Call on her for anything." As soon as the caller had left, Mother sat down and wrote a brief note. She said in part: "As you are the first member of the royal family to honor the hospital with a visit, I beg to suggest, if it pleases your Royal Highness, that you give it a distinctive name in honor of your visit." Mother expected that in a day or two she would have a note from the Queen, who was staying on the island. Or, of course, it might not come until after she returned to Honolulu. To her great surprise, the great lady came herself, evidently delighted at the request. "I named the hospital Malelane," she said, then explained, "Malelane means 'under the protection of heaven.'" Mother Mary Ann and the Sisters were pleased and touched by the choice of the name. "I wish, dear Mother," the Queen continued, "that you and all the good Sisters, and everyone who may ever come to the sheltering arms of Malelane Hospital, may have the sweet protection of heaven." The Queen's visit had been a tonic to the patients. All normal resentment of illness was swept away in the pleasure that they had been there when the beloved lady came. They were pleased by the name she gave and the hopes she expressed. The Sisters went even higher in their estimation, since it was plainly to honor them that Queen Kapiolani had come. But Mother couldn't rest on her oars. She was quite aware that there is no such thing as standing still in this life. You either push forward or are drawn back, and work was piling up. Sister Antonella had taken over the girls' school and was doing her best with the 20 non-English speaking pupils. But that was about all she could manage. Her health had been permanently damaged during the tempestuous trip to Maui, and she had but little strength. With the entire running of the hospital on their shoulders, Mother Mary Ann and Sister Renata worked as they had never worked before. The mechanics alone would have kept them on the run, even if Mother had not felt so strongly that in nursing personal contact is the priceless ingredient. Every patient Mother ever cared for deserved and received tender, loving care. Sister often felt that if it had not been for Mother's serene strength and wry humor, she could not possibly have accomplished what she did. They were just barely in the swing and the rhythm of the work when the blow fell. Word came from the Bishop that he wanted Mother back at Branch Hospital in Honolulu. Never had obedience come so hard. Neither of the two Sisters was well, and they had work enough for 4. But Mother didn't hesitate. nor would she permit the Sisters to be discouraged. "It's a compliment to your work," she assured them, "that the Bishop feels you can get along. I'll send someone to replace me, of course, but they need me at Branch Hospital, and I must go where I am needed. That is why I entered the Order." When the Sisters protested that nobody could replace her, that she was needed right where she was, she smilingly silenced and consoled them. And she never once mentioned her terror at facing the ocean again. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of The Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Treese. Problems galore. While Mother Mary Ann was in Maui, crises of varied sorts developed at Branch Hospital. Mother had established procedures and as much routine as possible in the short time she had. The Sisters were determined that there should be no slackening while she was away, no change in the routine. But they had not figured on the difficulties which were deliberately thrown in their way. Mr. Van Giesen and the men he controlled were determined to make life too hard for the nuns to endure. They sneered at the Sisters' efforts to humanize the place and, when possible, turned the patients against them. Mr. Van Giesen never lost an opportunity to show that he was in charge. One day while the Sisters were busy with their patients, he rigged up a call bell. The button to ring it was in his house, the loud bell in the convent. "I'll ring when I want you," he explained, "and when I do ring you are to come at once." The Sisters wondered why he seemed so pleased with the arrangement. They soon found out. They were always available during the day, and if he had ever gone near the patients he would have been bound to see the Sisters. But it was always after they had gone, exhausted, to bed that the summons would come, and it was never for anything important. Sister Crescentia was hollow-eyed. "I'm beginning to dread the night," she said. "This is just petty persecution." "I know it," Sister Bonaventure agreed, "but we'll just have to put up with it. He'll probably get tired of his tricks before long." One night the bell rang frantically. "It sounds as if there really might be trouble, this time." The Sisters dressed quickly and hurried out into the night. There was an eerie stillness over everything. Even the tall trees were motionless. The croton bushes, brilliant in the day, loomed dark as if they hid something ominous in their masses. The Sisters kept close together as they hurried across the yard. A brilliant tropic moon illumined the open spaces so they could see where they stepped, but the shadows were darker by contrast, inky pools of threat. Sister Crescentia couldn't help thinking of Mr. Van Giesen's oft-repeated statement that the patients hated white people and would kill them given the chance. She didn't believe it when he said it, and she didn't really believe it now, but just the same she'd be glad when they reached his house. There was no conversation between the two as they hurried through the midnight gloom. Mr. Van Giesen was pacing his office when they reached it, fear and anger on his twitching face. "Those men," he burst out as the nuns entered, "those men are smoking opium. It must stop. We must get them out or they'll be dangerous. We must get them and punish them." He seemed almost beside himself in fury and terror. "Where are they?" asked Sister Crescentia gently. "We will go and see them." "It's not safe, I warn you. I have men guarding them and—" He pointed across the yard, and the Sisters nearly laughed aloud at what they saw. The door of the small building for men was shut and a rope, tied around the doorknob, was being tugged heroically by two of Mr. Van Giesen's policemen. The amusing feature was that there was no need at all for the heroics. No one inside was trying to open the door. The nuns hurried over. "Where are the men?" asked Sister Crescentia. "Inside that house," was the answer. "They're no good men. Smoke too much opium." Sister fell into the useful pidgin English of the islanders. "Open the door, please," she said. "I like see." "Oh, no can. Bye bye, they run too much." "They no run," said Sister. "Take away rope." Slowly, cautiously, the police slipped off the rope. They plunged hastily aside as if expecting a mad bull to plunge out. Sister calmly walked inside. "Now what have you been doing?" she chided. "You promised me you'd be good." "We only smoke a little opium," said one placatingly. "We never been kill that fellow," a second reminded her, referring to the hated Mr. Van Giesen. "Will you let me have the opium?" asked Sister. There was silence for a moment. "Yes, you like, we give," said the self-elected spokesman. That other fellow, we never give. We like kill that other fellow. He not good. But we promise you fellows we never kill. We never forget that." A little smile curled the corner of Sister's lips. "That's good," she said heartily. "Now, you promise not smoke more opium and be good." "We promise. And those two fellows take away ropes of door. We not go away out this house because we like you fellows." "Thank you," said Sister. "I know you keep promise. You make promise. Now opium." Silently they handed her 3 short stumps of pipe. Only a very little opium was in each. "Only this?" Sister was surprised. "That's all. Not smoke too much. You like, you take." "Now you be good boys," said Sister, smiling compassionately at them. "I'll see you in the morning." The Sisters hurried back to the office to report that they had done, and found Mr. Van Geesen raging. It would almost seem that Sister Crescentia's success had added fresh life to the flame of his anger. "They're dangerous men," he growled. "Dangerous, I tell you, and they must be punished. I'll see to that." Sister Crescentia tried to calm him. "They were seeking a little relief from pain – and hunger," she said. "They have promised me not to do it again." "Promised?" Mr. Van Geesen put unlimited scorn and disbelief into the word. "They've never broken a promise to me," she insisted. She was aware that such a promise might well have saved Mr. Van Geesen's life. "Won't you give them another chance?" asked Sister Bonaventure. "I said they are to be punished." Mr. Van Geesen fairly spat out the words. Disheartened, the 2 nuns went back to their quarters to try to sleep for what was left of the night. They felt discouraged and completely helpless. Their assistance was asked for often, but their advice was always ignored. They were unhappy when they learned the next day that the men were in solitary confinement, but they were relieved to see that the people knew that it was Mr. Van Geesen's doing and that the Sisters had tried to excuse the men. Not many nights later the alarm bell rang again. Frenziedly it summoned the Sisters, and they answered with all possible speed. Outside Mr. Van Geesen's house a crowd of lepers milled about, some shouting, some weeping, some in numbed silence. "You are all to go back to your own places." Sister Crescentia barely paused in her mad dash. The crowd melted away like sugar in hot water. They did not seem to go. They were just gone. Inside the building they found the director shaken, battered, his clothes in disarray. "They were trying to kill me," he gasped. "They nearly killed me." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "9 burly lepers burst in and shouted that my end had come. It seemed as if they were going to pull me to pieces. They tugged at my hair and my beard and hauled me about by the arm. They were going to kill me and throw my body in the ocean." He paused for a moment, trembling with fright. Several deep breaths helped him get control again. "They would have done it too, except for you Sisters. They quieted down quickly enough when you came." Again he seemed almost to resent the nuns' ability to manage the lepers. Then vindictiveness took over. "They'll regret this night. They'll suffer for it." His snarling voice seemed to have in it much of what had been so disturbing in the mob's yells earlier. The next morning the 2 Sisters went first to the Bishop and then to Mr. Gibson to report the affair. "You understand," each man made clear, "that the would-be murderers must be punished." "Yes, we understand that," the nuns agreed. "But the incident would not have happened in the first place if there was not so much injustice shown. The patients should be treated like sick people, not criminals, or they will all become criminals." "If we bring Mother Mary Ann back," the Bishop was thinking aloud. "Mr. Van Geesen will still be in charge," said Sister Bonaventure. "Yes," Sister Crescentia said, "but Mother does have a little influence with him. Not much, to be sure, but some." "He punishes too much," Sister Bonaventure burst out. "I have seen 4 or 5 men crowded into a dark cell not more than 4 feet by 4. No one could lie down, of course, not even sit, and they were kept there days at a time for slight infractions of rule." Mr. Gibson frowned. "We can't have that." He was evidently angered. "When Mother Mary Ann returns, we will make it plain that no prisoner is to be punished without previous consultation with her." "Mr. Van Geesen will not like that," said Sister Crescentia. "Then we will find a place somewhere else for him," said Mr. Gibson firmly. So Mother received the letter recalling her from Maui. She found things somewhat easier to manage with Mr. Van Geesen gone. True, there were still the surly ones, the patients who disliked the nuns, but their number lessened quickly when they realized that Mother and the Sisters really loved them and wanted only their good. At Mother's suggestion, Sister Crescentia dressed sores out under the trees except on stormy days. It was good for both nurse and patients to be out of the evil-smelling room which had been used. Sister Lodovica was in charge of the housekeeping. Without criticizing or hurting feelings, she had to introduce completely new ideas. In the patients' dining room, for example, it was up to her to end old methods of table clearing after meals. She could not quite agree that the good way was for a barefoot girl to climb on the table, dump a bucket of water, and then with a wildly flailing broom shoot dirty water, bread crusts, fish bones, to all corners of the room, where they stayed drawing millions of flies. With more authority now, Mother Mary Ann could drive ahead. She had to oversee the nursing. She planned for the religious training of Catholics or of any patients who wished to become Catholics. Some of the children were almost wild, and they had to be taught gently but firmly to conform, as far as possible, with the accepted norms of living. Mother managed in her quiet way to be everywhere at once, to share in all the work. In August 1884, about 7 months after the Sisters had arrived on the island, Mother wrote a letter to Syracuse. "You have every reason to think that I am wilfully neglecting you," she said, "but I beg to assure you that such is not the case, and that only the want of time is the cause of my silence. We have constantly 200 sick here afflicted with a horrible disease. We are in a strange country among strange people, and are responsible to the government for our transactions." The government did want to help, to give it credit, but at the time little was known about leprosy. New drugs and methods of treatment were tried out, but it was not always easy to get doctors willing to expose themselves. So the 5 Sisters were to an extent on their own in caring for the 200 patients. Even so, they found time to plan treats for their charges. When Christmas came, each received a little gift. The dining room was decorated, and the girls were brilliant in the brown dresses trimmed with turkey red, which had been made for every one of them. By degrees the nuns managed to introduce at least rudimentary cleanliness in buildings and grounds. The patients began to realize that keeping things clean discouraged flies, and that it was pleasant to be without those pests. Personal cleanliness was harder to achieve. The girls especially had an overwhelming opposition to soap and water for themselves and their clothing. With brushes and combs they wanted no traffic at all. Ellen Davis was a case in point. 10 years old, but tiny for her age, she gave the effect of never having been washed. From the top of her head to the soles of her feet, she was cased in dirt like a snail in its shell. Sister was at her wits' end trying to think of a way to get the child clean. Suddenly she had an inspiration. "Ellen," she said, "if you stay in your bath a long time this afternoon and scrub yourself well, something nice might happen." "Will I come out white?" asked Ellen eagerly. "Let's find out, shall we?" The water was hot, the soap plentiful, and the scrubbing was almost violent. For the first time Ellen seemed really interested in a project. She was delighted when her hitherto concealed skin came out of its accumulated covering, pale golden in tone. "My hair, Sister! What about my hair?" "Scrub that too, then after you get dressed we'll see." The hair, which had been a solid cap, fell free and silky. Her eyes flashed and danced in joy at her new-found beauty. Instead of wiggling and pulling away, she stood quite still as Sister put a clean dress on her. "Now go show yourself to Mother," said Sister. "Ask her if you're not nice." Ellen bounded away and rushed to Mother's office. "See me?" she bubbled. "Am I not nice?" "You're very nice, but who are you?" Mother's eyes twinkled. "You're not Ellen Davis. I know, you're my little Snowdrop." From that time on, Ellen insisted on being called Snowdrop, and for a long time she was clean. Even when playing some of the games Mother introduced, she was careful of herself and her clothes. But if Mother could deal in love with the children, the hidden steel of her nature was called on with some of the men. The giant Tom Birch, who had been a sycophant of Mr. Van Giesen, and who still ruled many of the patients because of his bullying ways, this ugly customer gave Mother many tense times. But secure in her knowledge that she was right, serene in her faith, Mother faced him down and won her point. In Syracuse 2 distinct feelings were growing among the community: a desire to go to the islands and share in the wonderful work being done, and a somewhat impatient wonder as to when Mother Mary Ann, their provincial, was coming back to them. In February 1885, the bishop in Honolulu decided that the matter must be settled. He wrote to Father Leeson in Syracuse that he felt that Mother should be left where she was. She had every qualification for the work she was doing, he pointed out, and she enjoys the highest esteem and full confidence of all she has to deal with. The following August she was relieved of her duties as provincial. She was delighted to be free to work with undivided mind, but there was a little shiver of distress along with her satisfaction. Mother had never thought of herself in the role of a pioneer woman, yet that was the part in which life had cast her. She was to break ground in the care of sufferers from a misunderstood disease. The welfare of hundreds, even thousands, of sick people depended on her wisdom and judgment. Her sisters, too, must have her undeviating care. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of The Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. A second contingent of Sister Fellows. As Mother Mary Ann's plans expanded, work increased, and since the Sisters were already doing more than possible, it was evident that more Franciscans must come out. As before, many more volunteered, begged for the privilege that could be spared. Maui had its hospital and girls' school. The branch hospital was operating more smoothly, but there was one plan Mother had not been able to put into operation, a plan in which the Queen and kind Mr. Gibson were interested in. Children of affected parents could be saved from contracting leprosy if they were taken away from their parents early enough. "Why not build a home for girls near our house?" asked Mother Mary Ann. "But, Mother," Mr. Gibson was aghast, "you Sisters are already carrying a cruelly heavy load. To try to do more would be inhuman." "We have divine assistance," said Mother. Then realizing that Mr. Gibson was not too impressed with that argument, she added, her eyes twinkling, "And I feel certain we could get a few more Sisters if we get the home." "If that can be arranged," Mr. Gibson agreed, "I am sure we will have no trouble getting money for the girls' home." The Sisters were on their way. Sisters Leopoldina, Charles, Benedicta, and Martha made the journey so quickly in their minds that they expected the actual travel to be smooth and fast, too. But halfway across the country their adventures started. Council Bluffs had, since covered wagon days, been the jumping off place, the place where parties split, then reformed for either the Santa Fe Trail, the Ruta Natchez, or directly west. The Sisters were to change trains there with a wait of some hours between. This was no hardship. In fact, they were quite pleased. They had been living on food packed at home, and the thought of a hot meal was tempting. They left the train and walked out of the little station, sure that a village would not be far off. Sister Leopoldina and Sister Benedicta were doing the scouting while the other two kept an eye on the baggage. The sidewalk was, or it had been, made of planks. There seemed to be more gaps than wood now, and walking was a chancy business. It required, really, a sort of dance step, 2 steps aside to miss a hole, and 3 ahead where the wood was solid. It seemed as if they had been progressing in this somewhat erratic fashion for a long time without meeting another human being when a man slouched along, eyeing them with amusement. Sister Benedicta spoke to him. "Could you kindly tell us where we can find a restaurant?" she asked. "We have been traveling and are very much in need of warm food." For a moment they thought he was not going to pay attention to them. Then, with a queer sort of smile, he answered, "Oh, yes. Go right ahead until you come to that first building. Enter, and go up the stairs and turn to your right." The musty building was most unattractive and the rickety stairs uninviting. "Wouldn't you think they'd have a more pleasing entrance?" said Sister Leopoldina as she fumbled in the darkness. "Perhaps the food is so good that people come anyway." Sister Benedicta tried to sound hopeful. They stumbled up the hammock-shaped steps. When they reached the top and turned as directed, they found themselves in a big, dirty room. The air was thick with tobacco smoke, and in its center, around a rough table, was a villainous-looking group of unkempt, unshaven men intent on some card game they were playing. Various sized piles of coins marked each place. Gamblers and Sisters caught sight of each other at the same instant. It would be hard to tell which group was more startled. "Wrong place," gulped Sister Benedicta. Come, Sister." They turned and descended the stairs with a good deal more speed than they had dared show climbing up. "It wasn't a very kind trick that man played on us," said Sister Benedicta as they tangled back over the plank walk. "No. But, Sister, those men's faces were funny. They were so startled." She couldn't help laughing, and Sister Benedicta joined her at the recollection. But they were less gay when they had to return to the depot and report no success in the search. After a wearisome hour or so on the hard wooden benches, Sister Charles said she would like to go for a short walk. Sister Leopoldina joined her. They started off in the opposite direction from the one taken earlier. This time they walked on solid planks and past attractive homes. From one of them a young woman came out to greet them, and before they quite grasped what was going on, all four nuns were in a pleasant house and seated before a table bearing a hot, savory meal. By train time the travelers felt that they would be leaving old friends. They had, fortunately, a few days to wait in San Francisco before their ship, the Alameda, was to sail. They discovered that no arrangements had been made for their passage. They had no money, and things generally were confused. But by April 15th, sailing date, all was well and they were aboard. "We'll go through the Golden Gate!" exclaimed Sister Charles. "I've heard so much about it. I'm anxious to see it." A low-lying fog and thick mist deprived her of that pleasure, but she and Sister Leopoldina stayed on deck anyway in the hope that they might see something. Once through the gate, the little vessel began to roll and pitch. "My, I hadn't expected quite so much violence," Sister Leopoldina said to herself. "But, of course, I've never been on the ocean before. I have everything to learn." She settled herself into a deck chair intent on learning. Sister Charles groaned a little. "I am beginning to feel sick," she said. "Oh, you can't be," Sister Leopoldina assured her. "Don't you remember? When we left the Sisters of Charity house in San Francisco, they said we would not be sick." Sister Charles, growing paler by the minute, seemed to have less faith in the Sisters of Charity and the rule of prophets. The Alameda nosed down into the ravenous waters. Before she came up, an irresistible wave hit her broadside, covering the deck and almost sweeping away the nuns, chairs and all. Sister Charles stood up, intending to go down to her cabin, but the double motion of the deck, fore and aft and side to side, gave her no chance to get her equilibrium. Sister Leopoldina wanted to help, but couldn't. She looked about and for the first time realized that they were the only people on deck. As she gazed, she saw that the horizon, on which she had planned to feast her eyes, kept disappearing. First it was hidden by the floor of the deck above, then the deck on which she was. As she was considering the phenomenon, the first mate hurried up. "Ladies," he seemed quite excited, "this is no place for you. Let me get you below. We're in for some dirty weather." "Isn't the ocean always like this?" Sister Leopoldina was still seeking information. "Gracious, no! I've never seen it so rough so soon." "Help Sister Charles if you will. She isn't feeling well," said Sister Leopoldina. "I can find my own way very nicely." The mate caught Sister Charles by the arms and almost carried her. Sister Leopoldina, after a few false starts, followed. But the stairs, when she reached them, offered rather a problem. They seemed so uneasy. They were constantly shifting and moving as she looked down to the next deck, which appeared to be a chasm below her. Then, ever practical, she decided that she must take the quickest and, under the circumstances, the safest way down. She slid down the banister. The other three sisters were up and about the next day. Poor Sister Leopoldina was the only bad sailor. Sometimes she dozed off into nightmares, fierce dreams of being in the ocean with sharks crunching her bones. When she awoke, she was almost sorry it was not so. Then, at least, it would be quickly over. The captain was most kind and thoughtful, having special dishes prepared for her to see if they would help. They didn't. He was distressed, too, at the thought of young women sentencing themselves to work with lepers. "If I were your father," he said, "I'd never permit you to do a thing like this." For the first time in some days Sister Leopoldina gave a small smile. "But my father was very willing," she said proudly. "He encouraged my sacrifice." The Captain shook his head wonderingly. "I believe it," he said. "Catholics are like that." "Will you come and see us when we are settled?" asked the Sister. "Oh, no! Never!" The Captain shuddered. When the Alameda drew near its dock, the Sisters lined the rail, their eyes searching the crowd anxiously. The miseries and hardships of their trip would melt from memory, they all felt, as soon as they saw Mother Mary Ann. As the throng on the pier shifted, they scanned each new opening for the deep eyes and loving smile they so longed to see. "Have you seen Mother?" "No, have you?" "I haven't, and I can't understand it. She'd be here to greet us if she wasn't sick." At last it was put into words, the thing on all their minds. The ship was warped in and made secure. The gangplank was lowered and the Sisters walked ashore. An old man separated himself from the crowd, a tall man with white hair and flowing beard, whose kind, strong face was reminiscent of paintings of the prophets. "I am Mr. Gibson," he introduced himself. With a smile, "The Queen has sent carriages for you. Mother Mary Ann is waiting there." Hardly taking time to be impressed by the fact that they were riding in royal carriages, the Sisters packed themselves in, two with Mother, the other two in the second carriage. Mother Mary Ann and Sister Benedicta and Martha had a great deal to talk about. The newcomers were eager to hear about the work that had been accomplished and of plans for work to come. Mother longed for news from home, accounts of happenings in Syracuse, and messages from friends in other places. In the second carriage, Sister Charles and Leopoldina looked about, somewhat disappointed. They were not quite sure what they had expected, but they knew this was not it. Ordinary, one-story wooden buildings bordered streets which were not well paved. Honolulu might be any rather poor town in the United States, they decided, and they had expected a romantic South Sea village. As they left Honolulu proper and drove across the beach-bordered salt flats, the roar of the ocean grew loud. Sister Leopoldina cringed. The ocean, she felt, was no friend of hers. Nor were they any more impressed when the prison-like walls of Branch Hospital loomed up. It looked to be a desolate place with some of its buildings on pilings out over tidal waters. But once through the gate of the hospital, everything was different. Here they could see the work of Mother Mary Ann's kind hand and beauty-loving nature. Well-kept grass carpeted the large open space, and young trees had begun to take root and grow. All the cottages were freshly whitewashed, and the wide verandas had recently been painted gray. The serenity of Mother's soul was reflected, as far as possible, in her surroundings. Where she went, cleanliness and godliness went also. There was no doubt that improved looks of the place, combined with kind treatment, had helped change the patients to a great extent. There were still unfortunate habits among them, still occasional small outbreaks of trouble, but compared to what it was on Mother Mary Ann's arrival, Branch Hospital was utopian. The women and girls were particularly delighted with the change. Now, instead of sleeping on rags on the floor, each had her own iron bedstead with mattress, and all their housewifely instincts were brought into play. Mother Mary Ann, all too sadly aware of the rigors of an ocean voyage, told the newcomers that they must have a few days' rest before starting their assigned tasks. But the very day after they reached Branch Hospital, they had callers to welcome the new arrivals and to thank them. Once again the Queen greeted the Sisters as her sisters. Once again she wept because of the greatness of her gratitude. Sister Leopoldina was put in charge of a school for girls and women. She was a little afraid because Hawaiian sounded like nothing but a collection of sounds to her. Pretty sounds because of the vowels, but certainly not understandable words. And, tired as she was, she felt sure she would never be able to speak or understand the tongue. However, there were two girls in her group who spoke English. One was an older girl. The other was a very small one who looked rather like a mud ball. "What's your name, dear?" asked Sister. "Snowdrop." "Snowdrop? It can't be. A snowdrop is white and pure and clean. And you—" "Well, it is my name," the little one persisted. "Mother Mary Ann said so." As soon as she could, Sister Leopoldina checked with Mother. "Yes, I called her Snowdrop," Mother Mary Ann sighed. "We had her clean and well behaved for a while." But it didn't last. "Perhaps if I make her a new dress for Sunday." "Make the dress and put it on her as soon as you can get her to wash," said Mother with her quaint little smile. With care and love Sister made over a pretty green dress which had come in a donation of clothing. Snowdrop watched with fascination. "Now as soon as you bathe, scrub yourself well, and wash your hair nicely, you may have this," Sister promised. "I'll let you have it now. And, if you keep it clean for a week, I'll give you a pretty picture to hang by your bed." Although the price was high, a bath and staying clean for a week, Snowdrop decided that the dress and picture were worth it. She looked charming as she walked sedately toward Mother Mary Ann's office. "Come in," said the soft voice in answer to her knock. "Oh, it's Snowdrop! I'm so glad you're back and Dirty Ellen is gone." A wide smile transformed Snowdrop's face. Then a look of anxiety swept it away. "But I must keep my new dress clean for a week," she said in the tone of one given an impossible task. "I'm sure you can, dear," Mother consoled her. "Why don't you sit here and crochet some lace while I work at my desk?" "But I have no thread and no needle." "I can supply them." Mother Mary Ann's eyes brightened with as much gaiety as Snowdrop's own. "And I have a wonderful plan. You make lots and lots of pretty lace, and the Sisters will make some nice new underwear for you. Then you can trim it with the lace you made yourself." Snowdrop, dreams of untold grandeur driving her, set feverishly to work. Mother Mary Ann wrote for a while. Then, pen poised, she sat thinking of what Dr. Arning had told her. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. The Girls' Home. It was from Dr. Arning that Mother Mary Ann learned the sad news. Father Damien, who by his strength of soul and body had dragged the leper colony on Molokai up from the depths, was now himself infected. His death was, most likely, a matter of only a short time. His work among the tragic people had been tireless and his accomplishments were unbelievably great. But there was still much to do, and his strength was going. The situation on Molokai was bad. It was used as a place of banishment, a sort of penal colony, for lepers who were lawbreakers. Mixed in with the brave and fine sufferers there were opium addicts, gamblers, drunkards, even murderers. These made conditions hard for everyone and doubly underscored the fact that little girls not yet diseased should certainly be removed before they were infected physically and morally. Branch Hospital was now operating with a degree of smoothness. The home for girls must be pushed along. On November 9, 1885, it was ready. Advertisements had run in the Honolulu papers seeking a woman to act as matron in the new home, but there had been no takers. Mother Mary Ann appointed gentle Sister Martha to take charge. The two-story building was bright and pretty, but bringing the girls from Molokai to accept its welcome offered grave problems. Although the parents knew that their still healthy daughters would become diseased if they continued living at home, they bitterly resented having the children taken from them. The girls, for their part, had been allowed to run wild and were absolutely without discipline. They did not relish the idea of being subjected to any. The Kapiolani home was boycotted. One man killed the guard who had come to remove his two daughters, but in spite of parental protest the girls were taken to the home. And what girls they were! "When we get cross with our parents, when we don't like to do what they say," one snapping-eyed youngster told Sister Martha, "we go away." "Where do you go?" "We go mountains." "How do you live?" There was scorn in the young face. "Plenty berries, leaves. We know how." "And then what?" "We get tired, our parents feel sorry, we come home." There was a pause. "We don't like here. We run away, too." For some time all went well. The girls were interested in exploring their new home. It had big windows and wide glass doors to admit plenty of light and air. 2 dormitories and a room for Sister Martha occupied the second floor, while the first was made up of a kitchen, a dining room, and a classroom. The King and Queen, accompanied by Mr. Gibson, came to the formal opening of the home. The girls were fascinated by the pageantry of the occasion. Lilia, the oldest of the girls, and quite a beauty, almost wept when a lace-trimmed satin cushion bearing the keys of the home was formally presented to Mother. Mare and Marie, daughters of the unfortunate murderer, were delighted with the delicious food served at the party which followed. 5-year-old Annie, everybody's pet, fluttered from one group to the other, enjoying every minute. There was just one, 13-year-old Macca, who, while she accepted everything offered her, seemed never to be part of anything. Even though all the girls seemed to look up to her, she kept strangely aloof from them as from everyone else. From the beginning Macca interested Sister Martha. She was easily taught in her classes, when she felt like paying attention. She learned very quickly to play the piano, then suddenly lost all interest. And where Macca went, the others followed. What she liked, they approved, and what she disliked, they detested. Through sheer force of personality, she was a leader and she was headstrong. The best part of a year had gone by when one morning a troubled, frightened Sister Martha hurried to Mother Mary Ann. "Mother," she said, "7 of the girls are missing." "Missing?" Seeing Sister so deeply upset, Mother was doubly calm in an effort to help her. "Well, we'll find them. They can't have gone far." They looked first in all the obvious places and then in less likely ones. It was plain that the girls could not have scaled the high, tight board fence that enclosed the hospital grounds, and the padlock on the gate had not been tampered with. "Mother, if I had not been asleep, this would not have happened." Poor Sister Martha was distraught. "Oh, come, Sister. You must have sleep. You're human, you know, and not an angel yet." Mother's eyes twinkled for a moment, and the funny little smile everyone loved curled the corners of her mouth. But both went quickly to begin the search, for the matter was serious. These girls had been confided to their care, against the parents' wishes in many cases. The Sisters simply couldn't lose 7 of them. At noon, their search still fruitless, Mother called their kind friend, Mr. Gibson, and told him of the bewildering affair. In the afternoon he came with some of the Hawaiian police to help in the search. The men reinvestigated all the places the Sisters had been and thought of others. At the water's edge were great balls of seaweed left by the tide. The men carefully took these apart, but found no girls inside. They crawled under low bushes and climbed to swaying tree tops. No girls. At last the men left. "Don't worry, Mother," said Mr. Gibson. "When night comes and they get hungry and cold, they'll come back." "I hope and pray that is true," said Mother in a distressed voice. "But come from where? They certainly do not seem to be here. Yet I do not see how they could have got outside." "Well, if they did, and I don't see how, either, they will be found very quickly. The Honolulu police will be watching for them, and since they are strangers to the city, it will be easy to spot them." There was little sleep in the convent that night, and the next day was heavy with depression. Each time the telephone rang, Mother grabbed it eagerly, hoping it brought word of the runaways. It never did. Nor was there word the next day, or the next night. Father Leonor came out from the city several times to offer his help. Over and over again, every possible and impossible hiding place was searched, and heaven was bombarded with prayers. Police had combed city streets and climbed the mountains. Miles and miles of beach were examined in case the girls had gone for a swim and been swept away. At first little Annie had been most solicitous, consoling Sister Martha and helping Mother search. Then she became silent. The nuns thought she was lonely for her friends. But on the 3rd day she broke down. "I know where they are," she told Mother. "You do, Annie? When did you find out?" "I knew all the time." Mother was stunned. Would she ever understand these people and their way of thinking? "Why didn't you tell me before, Annie? You knew how worried your friend Sister Martha and I both were. Why didn't you tell us?" Annie looked somewhat abashed, but not overcome. "The girls like go, and Macca say I not tell, so I not tell. But now I think is long enough." Mother shook her head. "Sister Martha," she called, "come here if you will. Annie wants to tell us where the girls are." Bewildered, Sister Martha came. "I'll show you," said Annie. She trotted stolidly out, followed by the two wondering sisters. Across the corner of the yard she went and up to one of the wide verandahed buildings. "There!" she said, pointing behind a thick bush. "But Annie," Mother was a little exasperated. Was the naughty child playing tricks? "There is no one behind that bush. It couldn't have hidden 7 girls." With the controlled patience teachers sometimes show to slow pupils, Annie stepped forward and pointed to the ground behind the bush. The nuns spied a slight depression in the earth below the lattice under the veranda. It looked about large enough to admit a cat or a small rabbit. Mother stooped down and peered through the trellis. In the cobwebby gloom she could make out 7 small forms stretched full length on the ground. There would have been no room to sit up. Mother sent Sister Martha hurrying to bring some help in removing the lattice. And they had to help the girls out, too. Cold, exhausted, from 3 days with little food or water, gray with weakness and dirt, they were completely unrepentant. "We wanted away," was their only explanation. "Maka said she would take us. We went." "Weren't you very hungry?" Mother asked. "Oh, no. Every night Lilia and Annie brought us things from the table." Lilia and Annie! The two most dependable girls in the group, or so the sisters had always thought. There was a vital bond between the girls, Mother realized, that no stranger, however beloved, could interfere with. Father Leonor, who had given Maka a lovely prayer book because of her docility and cooperation, was furious when he learned that she had been ringleader in the exodus. He scolded her severely, and she promised not to do it again. She didn't need to repeat herself, because any time the Spirit moved her, her fertile mind produced new ways to make trouble. Even so, bit by bit, the girls were adjusting to the difficult ways of civilization. Though they accepted the imposed rules of cleanliness and order, they remained wild and unfettered mentally, needing at intervals to prove that rules are not for them unless they wish to accept them. At such times even Mother Mary Ann, whom they all loved and wanted to please, found them almost impossible to cope with. In the fall of 1886 she had new matters to concern her. Mr. Gibson came to Mother's office one day, evidently disturbed about something. He was aging rapidly, and Mother worried for him, not only because his health seemed to be failing, but because of rumors she had heard. He was very close to the King and Queen, who knew that in him they had an honest friend, whose advice was always sound. This made many Hawaiians jealous, and their anger was further stirred by Mr. Gibson's support of Father Damien, and now of the sisters. However, it was not this enmity that bothered the good man on this particular day, but something quite different. "Father Damien has just come to Honolulu," Mr. Gibson said. "We don't know what to do with him." "I don't understand," said Mother. "Well, the boat will not be going back for a week, and in the meantime we have no place for him. He cannot, of course, stay at the mission in Honolulu and—" "Why couldn't he stay here with us?" asked Mother. "We can make him comfortable. More so than he has been for the past 16 years, I dare say." "I don't like to impose on you," Mr. Gibson said, "but it would be a wonderful solution to the problem." "Don't talk about imposing, Mr. Gibson. We will be proud and honored to have Father Damien with us." "Are you sure? You already have so many responsibilities. It would be helpful, to be sure, but—" "Mr. Gibson!" Mother Mary Ann's eyes were bright. "Don't talk as if we were doing you a favor. We will be glad to return some of your many kindnesses to us, of course, but in this case we are not. It is we who are being given the favor." She held up her hand to still further protest from Mr. Gibson. Then she rose from the chair behind her desk. "Come along with me. I'll show you the rooms I have in mind for him. These 2 large rooms which are part of the gatehouse can be turned over to his use," Mother explained as they neared the building. "They have their own entrance, see? We'll fix one room up as a little chapel, and he can have the other as a sleeping room." Mr. Gibson beamed. "Mother, this is wonderful! Ideal! If you need furniture, if there is anything I can do, can send, will you call on me?" Mother Mary Ann smiled and agreed to let him help in any way he could. Gracefully and graciously she showed him out. She had work to do. Mother never seemed to hurry. There was never a sense of rush about her. Yet few people could keep up with her when she started on a project. and she was determined that when Father Damien arrived his room would be ready and an altar prepared for daily Mass. As if by magic a cheerful rug, a nice bed, a comfortable chair were found and taken to the guest's room. Fresh mosquito netting was put in place. Then in the next room an altar was prepared, a well-scrubbed table covered with Mother Mary Ann's finest linen cloth. Then, very excited, they waited for Father Damien to arrive. They had, of course, heard tales of his great strength, his tall, youthful vigour, his drive. When he arrived they were dismayed. His purplish skin, thick pendulous ears, swollen nose, and bloodshot eyes showed that the disease was progressing rapidly. But even so the drive was still there. So, too, was the gentle kindness and childlike gratitude that so endeared him to his people. He commented with appreciation on each detail of the preparations which had been made for him, accepted with sweetness the small comforts supplied, but, most of all, he was grateful for the opportunity to talk with Mother Mary Ann. For years the good priest had longed to have sisters in his colony, and now, as his end drew near, he was more than ever anxious to have them come, to see them established before his final summons came. During the week he waited for the boat to take him back, for the last time, Father Damien and Mother Mary Ann had many long talks. They were agreed from the beginning on the need for having sisters in Molokai. The only problem was when and how they should get there, a problem that seemed insoluble. But Mother Mary Ann felt that her call was to work on the island. She was willing to trust God to get her there. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of The Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. A Signal at Night. During his stay at Branch Hospital, Father Damien had accomplished a great deal. The fact that Molokai was so often used as a place of punishment made law-abiding patients reluctant to go there. Yet because of overcrowded conditions at Branch Hospital, it was plain that before long a good many of the sick people must be moved to the other island, in spite of their protests. To these, Father Damien had pointed out how much better off they would be on Molokai. "Here," he said, "you are confined. Other people will not come near you because you are different, diseased. On Molokai all your neighbors are just like you, and no one scorns you." "And may we move about?" asked one young man. "Of course. You may ride horseback, climb the hills to get fruit and berries, and fish all you want to. You can spend long hours in the surf gathering seaweed and shellfish. You are, to a very large extent, free to live your own lives, quite different from the way it must be here where you are so confined." This new angle interested a good many of the patients. Hawaiians need to be free, and the knowledge that on Molokai they would have a good measure of freedom made the move there less objectionable. Not all of them felt that way, of course. Particularly unwilling to leave Honolulu were the group of men who, in spite of reprimands and punishments, still persisted in gambling. They wanted no break in their ranks, wanted to continue in the pastime even though it was particularly bad for them because of their nervous and mental constitutions. Others, who had known comfort and care for the first time after the Sisters arrived, did not want to leave this solace. They were unaware of the fact that Mother Mary Ann was planning to go to Molokai too. In a letter to Syracuse dated February 16, 1887, she had said in part: "You are aware that our work up to the present time extended from Honolulu to Wailuku, Maui. In Honolulu we have 100 leper patients under our care, and in the same yard we have the Kapiolani Home with 13 girls. On Wailuku we have a general hospital and a girls' school, but you will remember that from the first it was expected that some of us would sooner or later go to Molokai." After her talks with Father Damien, Mother Mary Ann had decided that now was the time. She was just waiting until, under Mr. Gibson's direction, a proper home was built with funds supplied by a generous Hawaiian named Mr. Bishop. During this wait things were far from calm at Branch Hospital. Sister Crescentia had once faced and conquered the will of troublemaker Tom Birch. The King and Queen, on a visit to the hospital, had made it plain to the men that they must be obedient, must cooperate with the Sisters. They seemed quite docile. The nuns saw neither opium smoking nor gambling among them. So when Mother Mary Ann, ever careful of the sisters under her charge, told Sister Crescentia that she must have a little vacation, there was no worry or upset. While Sister Crescentia went to Maui for a rest, Sister Benedicta could easily take charge of the men patients. Among them was a well-educated young Hawaiian, Judge Kaluna. His music added much to ceremonies in the hospital chapel, where he played his plaintive flute during Mass and at benediction. He was the father of 5 children, whom he had been obliged to leave, and the sisters were very pleased with the way he had adjusted to his exile. It all seemed serene to Sister Benedicta when she took over the new duties, and she sailed into the work with a will. Mother Mary Ann, however, had an uneasy feeling. The surface of life was unnaturally and somewhat ominously placid, it seemed to her. So she was unhappy, but not too surprised, when one of the men said he wanted to speak to her. "The other men, the gamblers," he said. "They are planning bad things." "What kind of bad things?" "I don't know just what, but they want to get rid of you, of all the sisters." "Why?" "Bye bye if you go Mr. Van Geesen comes back. They hope. He don't care much if they gamble." "But I thought they didn't gamble any more." Mother Mary Ann was distressed. "Oh yes, they don't stop at all. Tom Birch says if anyone tell, he kill." "Is Tom Birch the ringleader, the boss?" "Tom Birch is big boss. Judge Kaluna is next boss." Mother's heart sank. Judge Kaluna had seemed to be a fine person in every way. He had appeared to be grateful for the care and nursing given him. It was depressing to learn that he was part of the motley gang of gamblers. Tom Birch still resented having been deposed from the position of power he had held under Mr. Van Geesen. He was outwardly less difficult, but inwardly he seethed with anger and hope for revenge. The judge, a higher type and with finer tastes normally, was resentful at being separated from his family even though he knew it was necessary. Together they could indeed cause trouble. When names were read listing the group which was to go from Branch Hospital to Molokai, Judge Kaluna was included. Mother Mary Ann noticed a glance exchanged between him and Tom Birch, but that was all, except for a queer stillness that settled over some of the men. Days were exhausting. Sores still had to be dressed, the girls' school taught, and the little group which was interested received religious instruction. Besides that, they were packing in preparation for the men who were to go. At night the nuns were almost played out. One night they were awakened. Not sure, yet, what had aroused them, they listened. It came again, a queer, mournful call in the darkness. Probably the whistling moan of a conch shell, the unforgettable tone of the native signal. But who blew it? Who was calling and who being called? Mother Mary Ann looked out her window. There were no lights, no movement in the black night. The puzzle remained unsolved and was forgotten as the men went off, not to return even in death. They could not pass through the city of Honolulu, so they had to load into small boats on the hospital shore and go from there to their ship. There was heart-shattering grief in listening to them sing their aloha oe, the islanders' farewell, as the little boat pulled away. Before his boat left, Judge Kaluna said he wanted to speak. His true nature shone out in his talk, in which he said that, too late, he regretted the trouble he had made for the sisters. He spoke of the beauty of soul and generosity of heart possessed by Mother Mary Ann. When he finished there was dead silence. Then suddenly a cheer was raised. Cheering the sisters, waving their hats and handkerchiefs, the men were off to Molokai. Tom Birch was the only one of the troublemakers left, and with the loss of his henchmen combined with the progress of his sickness even he had quieted down. But there was Mr. Stillwell. He was an American, of enough means to permit him to have his own little place on the grounds and to keep a servant. He was very devoted to the sisters and had never had anything to do with the unruly members of the colony. But he was a big, powerful man with a fierce temper when crossed, and he seemed to take a rather grim delight in terrifying Sister Leopoldina, who usually attended him. He had lived a violent, exciting life working in the goldfields of California, and he used to enjoy telling stories of those days. It is probable that he heightened the dangers a bit, added to the number of men he had fought and sometimes killed, but even so the tales held Sister spellbound as she cared for him. At the same time she shivered in fear of his anger. Even when not riled, he was a little frightening, for he carried a cane of about the thickness of a baseball bat and used to pound the floor with it for emphasis. It was this stout cane which haunted Sister Leopoldina one morning when Mother Mary Ann spoke to her. "Sister, I must go into town on business," she said. "Sister Crescentia will drive me. She manages the new horse very well." "What time do you expect to be back, Mother?" "Around noon, I should think. While I am away I want you to take my place in the office." "Mother, suppose Mr. Stillwell comes and demands morphine?" "Just say I'm not here. He will wait." "But will he, Mother?" "Of course he will. What else can he do?" Unfortunately, with the pictures of Mr. Stillwell's face contorted by rage and of his heavy cane in front of her, Sister Leopoldina could think of many things he could do, and none of the things was pleasant. She walked across the quiet grounds toward the office and opened the door. Her knees trembled and her head swam. There inside the office, leaning on the knobbed end of his cane, was Mr. Stillwell. "Good morning." Mr. Stillwell's greeting was pleasant. "Good morning, Mr. Stillwell. Mother has gone to town." Sister Leopoldina got the information in at once in the hope of forestalling a demand for morphine, if one was to be made. "Yes, I know she has. It's such a pleasant morning I thought I'd walk over and see you." With a show of composure, Sister walked to the desk and started working on accounts. Her guest watched for a moment and then began pacing up and down the room, up and down, banging his cane on the bare floor with each step. It was plain to Sister, who knew him well, that he was planning to tell a story. She hoped he would, even though it would hold up her work. For, while he talked, he might not think of his pain and of the drug which killed that pain. "Sister," he said at last, "do you remember hearing a strange whistle or call a few nights ago?" "Indeed I do, Mr. Stillwell. It gave me the shivers. What was it? Do you know?" "What did it mean? Yes, I can tell you. And I'll tell you something more. If you had known then what it meant, you would really have had the shivers." Wide eyed, Sister put her work aside and gave all her attention to her guests. "The men were angry with Mother Mary Ann because she had broken up fights and insisted on discipline. In fact, they resented all of you and did not want to go to Molokai. So they plotted to kill you." Sister gasped. "The gang met each night in Tom Birch's room and laid their plan. On the chosen night Mother was to be called from the house for 'an emergency.' She would be killed. Then they would rush the convent and kill the rest of you." "All of us?" "No. Sister Benedicta was to be kidnapped. Judge Colonna was to escape along with the others. Once out he would leave them and, taking his prisoner, Sister Benedicta, over the mountains with him, he would go to his little farm, where she could nurse him." Sister shuddered, almost dizzy with horror. "That eerie whistle?" "That whistle was the signal." "But what? Why didn't?" "I got wind of something going on," said Mr. Stillwell with satisfaction. "I sent my houseboy John to spy on them. Since he is a native, it was easy enough for him to join the gang." "And then?" Mr. Stillwell's face flushed and his eyes popped in excitement. "They gave the signal. And I let them see that I was there ready for them." He swung his heavy club wildly. "I was ready to crack open every head if they tried to hurt the Sisters." The still unharmed muscles of his shoulders rippled and his eyes took on a glint of near madness. "But you were one and they were many. They might have killed you, Mr. Stillwell." "I doubt it. They were cowards." Mr. Stillwell left the office, his brutal, life saving club thumping the ground as he walked away. Sister seated herself at the desk, trembling and sick at the recollection of Mr. Stillwell's story. Then suddenly she began to laugh and was still laughing when Mother returned. She told Mother the story. "But that wasn't funny, Sister." Mother was bewildered. "What made you laugh so?" "I was remembering my last letter from my school friend. You remember. The one in which she said how she envied me my calm convent life on a peaceful island. I wonder what she would make of this incident." Mother Mary Ann laughed too. "You better not tell her about it," she said. "It might disillusion her." Sister agreed, and Mother, still pondering disciplinary problems at the boys' school, started on her mountain of paperwork. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Changes. The unremitting work in Branch Hospital and in the Capiolani home was telling on some of the Sisters. Mother Mary Ann never demanded the impossible from anyone but herself, so she was always on the lookout for opportunities to give the Sisters a little treat. "There are errands in town," she said to Sister Leopoldina one morning. "Sister Charles will drive you in, and you are not to come straight back when you've completed your business." "Not to come straight back, Mother?" "That is what I said." Mother made her voice quite stern, but her eyes had their delightful twinkle. "I've given Sister Charles the same instructions. Now get on your way." The two nuns were like schoolgirls in their pleasure. It was a perfect day. A pleasantly warm sun was tempered by a soft breeze from the water, a breeze which gently swayed tall trees and sent little shadows of blossoms drifted down. At intervals one of these flowers fell on old Charlie's ear and caused him to twitch it, but other than that small gesture he trotted along like an automaton, like a horse in his sleep. From his well shaped head and good ankles you could see that he was a horse of fine breeding, and that gave Sister Charles a good deal of satisfaction. In her girlhood she had driven her father's horses. He always had the best, she would explain. So even though she was frail and far from well, it was a joy to have reins in her hands again. "It makes some kind of bond between us," she commented. "A good horse, like Charlie, can sense what his driver wants almost without any weight on the reins." Charlie's stolidity when he stood while Sister did her errands, his super decorum when they started for their pleasure drive, gave no particular indication of this bond. Nor, on the other hand, did it give indications of other facets of his nature. He was just a somewhat elderly horse doing what he was supposed to do. They drove down King Street, past comfortable houses with well tended gardens, and on toward the park. Tall palms climbed straight and then erupted into a crown of greenery. Beds of brilliant flowers shouted for attention, and even bushy clumps were bright with multicolored leaves. The two nuns drank in all the beauty. Suddenly Charlie's head came up and his ears pricked forward. He was jarred out of his contemplation by the sight of a horse ahead of him. Ahead! Time was when no horse went ahead of Charlie. When he had been king of the road. Well, he'd show this pretender a thing or two. He trotted faster, but did not overtake the light carriage. He went faster, then faster, his ears laid back and his body straining. "I can't slow him down," gasped Sister Charles, her knuckles white as she tugged on the reins. "He has the bit between his teeth." "Don't try to slow him. This is exciting." Sister Leopoldina was enjoying every minute. "It won't be so exciting if a trace snaps or a wheel flies off," said Sister Charles. "We'll both be thrown out and killed." Charlie was going all out now. His legs moved like pistons. The carriage rocked and swayed, crashing into stones and dipping into holes. Bit by bit he overhauled the other horse, who didn't know it was a race. Having passed him satisfactorily, Charlie stopped, snorted, shook himself, then settled down to his usual dignified pace. "We'll go home now," said Sister Charles. "Oh, must we? That was a lovely ride." "I couldn't live through it if Charlie tried that trick again." Sister Leopoldina was distressed to see that her companion was pale, almost blue. But, she assured herself, no permanent harm had been done, and it had been a thrill. On an outing which could not be repeated very often as the workload increased. When the girls in the Capiolani home learned a little, they were then ready to learn more, and more time must be devoted to them. The number of patients in Branch Hospital grew, too. Time became steadily more precious, more packed with work. In the meantime, work on the Bishop home on Molokai was progressing, and Mother Mary Ann was winding up her duties in Honolulu and Maui. But in the spring of 1888 an event occurred that distracted her from all other activities. Mr. Gibson, Prime Minister in Honolulu, was deeply interested in the leper patients, and had always done all he could to help both Father Damien and Mother Mary Ann. This infuriated the few but powerful anti-Catholic bigots in the islands. He was close friends as well as adviser to the King and Queen, which angered political hopefuls. By the plotting of these haters, Mr. Gibson was removed from office. In fact, so much feeling had been aroused against him that the mob wanted to lynch him. He had been sent into exile where he was to die. "Our loss is great," Mother Mary Ann wrote. "It seemed that nothing gave him pleasure but to serve and wait on us." But despite the irreparable loss, work had to go on. Mother Mary Ann made a last visit to Maui to see how the work there was progressing. She visited Molokai and found the buildings almost finished. Each trip was made during particularly savage storms, added burdens for poor Mother, who was never a sailor. In fact, by now, so conditioned was she to suffering on the ocean, the very sight of a ship made her queasy. At 5 in the afternoon of Tuesday, November 13, 1888, Mother and two Sisters went aboard the little Liuwa, which was to take them to Molokai. The small ship also carried some men patients and about 20 girls and women. There was no moon that night, and the far off stars sent down little light. Even that small glow was often obscured by scurrying clouds or bits of spume lifted from the tossing waves by a prankish wind. The patients were all below in a damp, stuffy cabin, but Mother and her Sisters remained on deck. Rain had begun to fall, but even that was preferable to going inside. Mother thought of the work ahead and of her co workers. Sister Leopoldina had been in the Islands almost as long as Mother herself, but little Sister Vincent was a newcomer, a replacement for Sister Charles, who had been sent back to Syracuse in an effort to build up her health. Of her own health Mother did not think, although that very morning she had had a spell of faintness and had been near collapse. The ship struggled on. One of the officers came out to suggest that Mother might like to rest in the captain's cabin, but, since there was not accommodation for all the Sisters, she refused. The rain stopped, but the wind grew even more riotous. Just before dawn the officer came again. "See, Mother? Can you see that red light on the horizon over there?" he asked. "That is the light on the wharf at Kalaupapa, our landing place." Mother Mary Ann and the Sisters strained their eyes. At length they saw it. It seemed like a sanctuary lamp glowing in front of the place where they were going to offer up their lives to Christ through service to sufferers. The island of Molokai was long and curving and beautiful. It was lush with tropical greenery and brilliant with flowers. All, that is, except for a stubby peninsula sticking out like a thumb from the northern coast. This neck of land was cut off by tall cliffs, the Pali, which stood sentry between the main part of the island, and it was the thumb which held the leper colony. That colony had changed tremendously during Father Damien's years of guidance. His first home had been under the roots of a great pandanus tree. The lepers, living in shacks they had cobbled up themselves, had had no care except what they gave each other. There was no law and little order on the island then, and the children were without discipline or schooling. But now Father had a little house in Kalawao, near his church. Small houses for the lepers had been built, and activities for them to pursue had been introduced. The settlement at the landing, Kalaupapa, now had a home for girls, and Mother Mary Ann would soon be in charge. It was really for work in Molokai that she and the Sisters had left Syracuse. Now, after 5 years in the Islands, they were reaching their destination. The sun was rising and dancing rainbows curtained Kalaupapa. Waves battered against gray boulders on the shoreline, and then rose in a spray which caught and fractured the light rays and returned them to delighted eyes in iris colors. The little ship had not much farther to go. By the time it reached the wharf all traces of the night's storm were gone. They sailed in over calm waters. As they neared the shore they saw great white slashes down the sides of the Pali and learned that these were mighty cataracts seeking the sea. And on those cliffs ancient trees grew, and bushes, and vines, and flowers. When the nuns went ashore, however, welcomed by women who had been at the branch hospital earlier, they found things quite different. There was no trees, nor vines, nor bushes where the convent stood, nor had water been piped in. It was bleak, sun-baked, and dreary. But Mother Mary Ann smiled at the patients clustering around her. She praised the little convent, and seemed at home. Because of her contentment, it was easy for the Sisters to feel contented too. Poor Father Damien came to welcome them. Their coming was an answer to years of hopeful prayers. To be chaplain to them he assigned an assistant, Father Wendelin Moeller. The buildings in Mother's charge were new and clean, but she was more and more aware that their immediate surroundings were dismal. True, one could look at the waterfall trimmed Polly, at the ever changing ocean with its blue and green and gray waters. The crashing breakers on the beach brought movement and interest to the eyes, but in the grounds of the home there was bleakness. With Mother Mary Ann, to see a need was to plan action, and a plan was useless unless it was put into operation. With many of the people in the colony, of course, labor was out of the question. The awful disease from which they suffered first crippled and then ate away hands and feet. But all the girls at Bishop Home were encouraged to go to the woods and take flowers and small bushes for gardens near the home. It was a project which delighted the beauty loving Hawaiians, and the plantings, so tenderly were they handled, took hold and grew and flourished. In January Father Damien came to invite Mother Mary Ann and the Sisters to see his new church. The little wooden one which had been there when he arrived was now too small for his flock, and he had a new one which he had helped to build with his own diseased, disfigured hands. He himself could not see it very well, for as leprosy progressed, his sight went. But so much love had gone into the building of the church that he was sure it must be beautiful. Damien Road, which connected the nuns' place at Kalaupapa with the men's settlement at Kalawao, was called a road mainly because it was used as a passage between the two places. Afoot or on horseback it was not too bad because then the stones and holes along it could be bypassed. The heavy, springless wagon in which the nuns were conveyed seemed to have been especially designed for the road. Its width was such that it was impossible to avoid jolting over every rock, to miss the bone-shattering downs into every pothole. I'm beginning to remember what seasickness feels like," gulped Sister Leopoldina when they had been swaying and bouncing for a while. Mother Mary Ann looked at her with pity. "I hope not, my dear," she said. "I certainly hope not." Fortunately the trip was finished without any upset, and all discomfort was forgotten in the joy and warmth of their welcome. Father Damien in particular was happy. He was eager that Mother Mary Ann should go at once to see the site for the home for boys to be given by a Mr. Baldwin. "When I think that my poor afflicted children will have a mother's care, I am happy indeed," he said. "They have been so neglected. I couldn't fill a mother's place." Water piped down from the mountain was free flowing here. Grass was green and flowers and vegetable gardens flourished. The Sisters looked about them enchanted. They saw evidence of what their own grounds would look like after time and care had been expended on them. Mother Mary Ann had shuddered inwardly a little when Father Damien spoke of her taking charge of the boys and men. Resentful, unruly groups among them would offer problems, she knew, problems even greater than those she had already faced. At the branch hospital, fear of exile to Molokai could sometimes be used to obtain and to keep order. But these people were already in Molokai and would be there for the rest of their lives. She determined to face the problem only when it arrived and accepted Mr. Dutton's invitation to walk around to see some of the buildings. As she left Sister Leopoldina and Veronica with Father Damien, she surreptitiously shook a warning finger at them and pursed her lips. The Sisters nodded their recognition of the signals. Before leaving the convent, Mother had issued an order and a warning. "When we are calling on Father Damien, Sisters, remember that you must refuse to partake of any refreshment if it is offered." She paused for a moment to let the injunction sink in. "The wonderful man has been here for more than 15 years," she said. "From the very beginning he has lived closely with and been one of his people. That is how he first won their love and confidence. But that very devotion has its dangers, and he is often far from wise, I fear. So you will take no food." Mother Mary Ann was hardly gone when Father Damien turned happily to his guests. "Now, Sisters," he said, "you will have lunch. I have had a clean woman prepare a nice little meal for you. Come along." What should they do? Each sister hoped the other would speak. The silence was awful. "Father, I'm sorry." Sister Leopoldina had got up her courage. "Mother has forbidden us." The priest's bent shoulders drooped even farther. "That's too bad," he said. "The poor woman tried very hard." After a short silence, head bowed, he turned his kind, disease disfigured face toward them. "You can't refuse me this favor, and you don't want to disappoint the poor woman, I know," he said. "I'll make it all right with Mother." Their hearts went out to this man. After a long, grim martyrdom he was soon to die, and they could not bring themselves to deny him this pleasure. So they followed him into his dining room, where, quite evidently, things had been carefully made ready to receive them. Green shades were drawn against the sun, but a cool breeze moved them, causing shadows to dance on the sparkling white cloth covering the little table. But the nuns somehow could not enjoy the boiled eggs and freshly baked bread, the meat and good coffee. On the way back to Kalaupapa the nuns confessed their disobedience to Mother. For a few moments she made no comment at all. "I had to give an order," she said at last, "and you disobeyed it. You must decide what to do about that. As to the danger you play with, well, that is done now." "Mother, he had a special woman in to cook the meal, not a leper. We couldn't disappoint them." "Charity is a fine thing, I agree. But, Sisters, the whole house is full of leprosy. The dishes, the silver, the linen. And who handled the food before it was prepared? Have you any way of knowing that?" The nuns were distressed. But perhaps Mother Mary Ann was even more upset than they when the next day crippled, tortured Father Damien called on her. He flung himself on his knees and begged her pardon. It was he assured her, who was completely to blame for her sister's disobedience. Would she please scold him, begged the great but simple man. She must give him some penance. One thing Mother Mary Ann had not foreseen as happening in Molokai was having the world-renowned Father Damien kneeling penitent at her feet. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of A Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Storm. The girls at the Bishop home were settling down. Mother Mary Ann led, guided, cajoled, and, when necessary, scolded until there was peace and, what was even more important, hope. By now most of the girls were interested in something constructive, a very important detail for people in their situation. The gardens around the buildings interested almost everyone, and the first time the girls came home from an expedition to the woods bringing opulent ferns, there was great excitement. "Those are beautiful plants!" Mother Mary Ann was delighted. "And you have dug them up so carefully, that they should thrive. What are they?" "Birds' nest ferns, Mother," chorused the girls, delighted with the success of their efforts. "I wonder where they would look best?" asked Mother. "Near the path? By the road? Why not put them around the house?" The last suggestion was the one agreed upon. The yard man was summoned and the ferns carefully set out. Precious water hauled in casks from mountain streams was sacrificed to feed the thirsty roots. The plants throve. Then one morning the girls awoke to see the beloved ferns uprooted and scattered around the yard. One of the vandals was still at work. Wandering cows against whom there were no fences had pulled up the greenery, but not finding it good to eat they simply dropped the plants around the yard. A troop of yelling, scolding, arm-flapping girls descended on the cows and drove them off. It was bad enough that the beasts should often wake the girls at night when they scratched their back on the house corners, but to destroy beauty, that was too much. As soon as they were able the girls went again to the forest and again brought home ferns. Once again they were set out tenderly, once again they were established, and, unhappily, once again the wandering cows found and sampled and discarded the ferns. Mother Mary Ann made no suggestions. She did not want to press the girls into what might well be a losing battle. But once having seen the beauty of greenery around their verandas, the girls decided to continue the fight. And while the war was going on a newcomer appeared on the scene. "What is that?" asked Mother in alarm as a blackish, snuffling, grunting apparition lumbered up. "Is it dangerous?" Carpenters working on a new building laughed. "No, Mother, that's just old Dennis the pig. He's very gentle," they assured her. "A pig? That?" Dennis in his youth might have looked more like a pig. Then his black skin would not have been so deeply mud encrusted. But now, perhaps from years of rooting, his snout had an upward slant, his tusks had grown so long that they curved back nearly to his ears, and the stiff bristles on his back stood up in such a way that he seemed perpetually angry. It was hard, even for Mother Mary Ann, who always wanted to think the best of everyone, to believe that the creature had love in his heart. But he did, and he developed a particular affection for Sister Veronica, who became the source of many snacks. He became a regular visitor, and if Sister did not have his meal ready when he arrived, he would patiently stretch out on the grass and wait, legs folded under him, neck extended. He was there one day when one of the Sisters was showing a highly nervous doctor through the colony. Dennis was confident of his friends, so he didn't bother to get up when footsteps approached. His tusks, in their curving travels, pulled his lips back so his teeth shone out in a perpetual unintentional snarl, and his remarkable long neck gave a touch of the snake to his appearance. Dennis was such an accustomed visitor that Sister hardly noticed him. Dr. Swift, the caller, didn't notice him either until he almost stepped on the patient creature. The poor doctor saw him and jumped feet into the air, arms thrown wide, eyes starting from his head. "Good Lord, Sister!" he shouted. "Is that the devil?" "Not at all," answered Sister. "It's old Dennis the pig. Haven't you seen old Dennis before?" "I have not." The doctor shuddered. "And I would be just as happy if I never see him again. He's a horrible sight." "Dennis?" Sister was a little hurt. "But we're very fond of him. He's a pet of ours." "That? A pet? How could you be fond of such a creature?" "But we are, Doctor," Sister insisted as they walked on down the path. Not long after that, however, Mother Mary Ann's affection for the beast wavered a little. In fact, she hurt his feelings deeply by her disaffection. Very early one morning Mother was awakened by a bumping noise. She lay still a moment to locate the sound and heard a snuffling and shuffling outside her door. Her heart sank. Drunkenness was still an intermittent problem among the men, and she feared that some bemused man had strayed from his quarters. Such a one might be troublesome, she knew, but it would be bad to have the girls frightened. Frail in body though she was, it did not occur to her to do something but face the danger. The girls and the other Sisters were in her charge. It was her duty to protect them. Very cautiously she opened the door a crack to see who might be out there. She didn't have to see the intruder. Her nose told her. Dennis, fresh from some odoriferous wallow, had suddenly thought of his friend Sister Veronica and had gone looking for her. He snuffled ingratiatingly as he dripped slime on the well-scrubbed floor. Mother caught up a wooden doorstop. "Out! Get out!" she cried, shaking the bit of wood threateningly. Dennis was amazed. For a moment he couldn't believe he was being chased away. He had only come calling. But convinced though he was of his charm, he still could not read welcome into this voice and gesture. "Get out of here!" repeated Mother, shaking the bit of wood again. Sadly Dennis turned and lumbered down the hall. As he planted each doleful trotter on the floor, a glob of smelly mud marked his passage. But he went. And for the next few days he sulked. It took several offerings of luscious plate scrapings before Sister Veronica could console him. All memory of Dennis's transgression was wiped from the Sister's mind a few days later, by the arrival of a "devil's storm." The Sisters had heard of these from the natives, had listened almost incredulously to tales of the rampaging fury which came about once in a decade. They had seen the result of previous winds that hopped and skipped, selecting one building for destruction but ignoring its neighbor. On this particular day Mother Mary Ann had heard quite by chance of a poor woman, a leper, living some distance from the convent, who had upset a pot of boiling water on herself. There was no one to tend her, and Mother's heart shuddered at the thought of the agony she must be enduring. "Take dressings and salves," she said to Sister Leopoldina. "Sister Veronica will go with you. See what ease you can give her." It was a gentle, soft day when the nuns started on their errand of mercy. They were able to quiet the woman's pain considerably. They dressed the burns and the leprosy sores and tidied up her little home as best they could. It was nearly 3 in the afternoon before they started back to the convent. "We'll have to hurry, Sister," said Sister Veronica. "Supper won't be ready if I don't get into the kitchen soon." "If we cut across these fields," Sister Leopoldina suggested, "it will be shorter than following the road." It was shorter in distance, but they found the going tedious. Tall grasses were hard to push through, and the uneven ground slowed walking even further. Loose stones made footing treacherous. They were picking their way as fast as they could when Sister Leopoldina suddenly stopped and pointed toward the road. "Look, Sister," she said. "Isn't that queer?" Sister Veronica looked, and what she saw was indeed queer. No breath of air stirred the grasses around them, but in the road a wind snatched up masses of clayey soil, spun them into cones, which were lifted high in the air before being dropped. Then the wind scattered fresh material and played the same game over again. The two sisters stood spellbound. "Do you suppose this is the beginning of a devil storm?" asked Sister Veronica. "I shouldn't think so. This wind seems only playful." Even so the nuns were more anxious to get home, and tried for greater speed. When they reached the Bishop's home, the sportive wind was there before them. It tossed the flowers and spiraled the leaves. "It's wonderful kite weather, I think," said Mother Mary Ann excitedly. So she and the girls made balloons and kites, and laughed when the wind took them away. The air was quiet shortly before sunset, and everything was still as the smaller girls sat down to supper. But the meal was hardly on the table when the whole house shook like a rag in the teeth of a dog. The "devil wind" was on them. Howling and crying from far off cottages now rose, and over all was the whistling shriek of the wind. The sun dropped into the sea in the sudden fashion of the tropics. The dark was relieved by a brilliant moon, which shone down steadily and unmasked, unaware of the raging wind below. Mother Mary Ann looked out the window. A heavy metal can flew by, passing between Mother and the moon like something shot from a catapult. "We are quite safe here," said Mother Mary Ann calmly. Her serene voice quieted the frightened children. "This building is built of heavy, strong timber, you know." Her eyes twinkled and her lips curved into their heart-warming smile. "Where do you suppose our balloons have gone to now?" she asked. It was hard to be frightened in the face of such composure. The little ones became interested in guessing odd and impossible ports of arrival for the paper craft. "Mine is in Honolulu," said one. "Mine is on the moon." "Mine is in the United States. That's farther than the moon, isn't it, Mother?" The wind snarled. A heavy piece of timber wrenched from some other building hurtled through the air like a javelin. It struck the side of the cottage, a smashing blow, and jarred a heavy picture from the wall. Fortunately no one was in the way of the massive frame and shattered glass when it fell. A few of the older girls had been in the other cottages when the storm struck. One rushed in now. "Mother, come quickly! Kalawani tried to cross over here. The wind hit her with the veranda roof. She lies on the ground." Two of the Sisters carried the injured child to the convent while Mother tried to go on to check the damage. She was small and frail, and the wind was mighty. It caught her up, spun her in the air, and then dropped her at the far side of the yard. She struggled back toward the building she had left. It was hard to keep her eyes open against the wind, and breathing was such an effort that it seemed each breath must be the last one for which she could summon strength. A small figure in a frenzied world, her indomitable will and courage pushed her on. Near collapse, she at last reached the building into which some of the adults had now come for shelter they felt would be safer than their own huts. Everyone was keyed up, tense. The door flung open and a strange figure entered. A white-wrapped spectral figure. "A ghost!" cried the superstitious ones. "The devil of the storm!" moaned others. But before panic could take over, Mother recognized who the eerie visitor was, and her heart was sad. "John, what are you doing out in such a storm?" she asked. Then she addressed the young woman who followed. "Is your house—" "Yes, Mother, our house is gone. I helped John to get up and wrapped him in the bedspread, and we came here." "Of course you would, and I'm glad you did." Mother looked compassionately at the young couple. When the husband developed leprosy some time before, his wife, Kate, had elected to come to Molokai with him. With all their delicate china from home, their fine linens and good silver, she made the Molokai home nearly as charming as the Honolulu one had been. Now it was all gone. "Sister Veronica, take these young people over there with you," Mother directed. She gently turned the dazed, shivering couple toward a far corner of the room. "There are very heavy timbers supporting that end of the building," she explained. "You will be quite safe there." The words were hardly out of her mouth when the wind flung open an outer door. A pile of heavy, wide planks had been left outside by the carpenters until they could be used. Now the wind took them and one after the other scaled them into the cottage. Mother could feel them stir her veil as they passed over her head, but none struck anyone in their guillotine-like passage. "God be praised," said Mother. Suppose we all go into the chapel." Some of the lepers, of course, were Catholics, but many were not, and there were a few in the group who were bitterly anti Catholic. But that night they were all most willing to crowd into the chapel to pray. The sanctuary light flickered. As the building was battered, the Stations of the Cross tilted and danced on the walls, but the chapel stood as firm as the faith it represented. As suddenly as it had arrived, the storm departed. Morning showed wreckage all around. Some buildings were unroofed, some were in matchwood, some had been carried away intact, with not even a sliver of glass left to show where they had once been. But no one in Mother Mary Ann's care had been killed nor even seriously injured. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of A Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Damien goes, a visitor comes. Mother Mary Ann sat on the veranda, a basket of mending beside her. The sky was overcast and a sharp little wind had risen. But even so she preferred being in the fresh air. The veranda was wide so that rooms were protected from the hot rays of the sun, and except in high wind the windows could be left open on rainy days. The hills in the distance were becoming purplish, and some wore a fog cloud on their heads. Rain was coming, Mother knew, but she would stay out as long as she could. Much of the mending was of the simplest sort. She could do it mechanically while her mind was busy with other things. A strain of music drifted over on the wind, and she smiled. That had worked out well, she told herself. When the two women had first come into her care, their depression was overwhelming. Depression was not unusual with sufferers from Hansen's disease, the name of leprosy, but with these two it was greater than she had seen. It took patient, gentle questioning over many weeks before she found the reason, and the reason, by a strange coincidence, was the same in each case. Both were musicians skilled in playing the organ, and now neither could perform, for the disease had destroyed the feet of one and the hands of the other, and both lived in fuming resentment. Their mental state was doing them physical harm. Mother had considered the matter. Mother Mary Ann was above all things practical, down to earth, and completely without false delicacy. When, as a girl, lack of money made it impossible to buy things for her brothers and sisters, she had been able, as a rule, to concoct some substitute which gave them just as much fun. Barrel staves served as snowshoes or skis or sleds. Wrapped newspapers jauntily laced with ribbons had served as leggings. There must be some solution for the problem of the two musicians. When the solution came to her, she was amazed that it had taken so long. "It's so obvious!" she exclaimed to herself. "Now if they'll only cooperate." At first the two had demurred, but their craving for the music they loved to create was stronger than their obstinacy, and now they practiced almost every day. The one with feet pumped the organ, while the one with hands used the stops and keys, and the friendship which grew between them was valuable to both. Mother Mary Ann sighed, folded a patched pillowcase, and took another from the basket. If only all her problems were so easily resolved, she would be happy. She heard the wagon wheels coming along the road from Kalawao, and looked up to see who might be driving from there. It was Father Damien himself. It was unusual for him to leave his own area, but she was happy that he had. He hitched his old horse to a young tree and climbed up the steps to the veranda. The few steps seemed almost too much for the sick man. His swollen, pendulous ears hung almost to his shoulders, and his bloodshot eyes were nearly closed. He had to breathe through his mouth because the disease had taken his nose. Bent, crippled, disfigured, he was grotesque, he who had been noted for his height and strength in his handsome young manhood. Yet when he smiled and greeted Mother, she was unaware of his disfigurement, for she had the feeling she was talking with a saint. "I'm glad I happened to be out here with my mending," she said to herself. "He wouldn't have come into the house, being a leper, and he wants to talk." Mother's sweet sensitivity had not deceived her. Father Damien sat for an hour or more, talking of his work on Molokai, conditions in the past, and plans for the future. Mother put in especially tiny stitches on unusually well woven darns because she felt sure that once Father Damien saw that the mending was done, he would not want to hold her back from other duties elsewhere. He was well aware that there was no time allotted in her schedule for visiting. But with all her delaying tactics she couldn't stretch the mending out forever, and, as she expected, as soon as it was done, Father Damien rose to go. A fine, wind-driven rain had started. Father Damien shrank a little as it first assailed him, but he untied the horse, climbed into the wagon, and stolidly drove down the road. A few weeks later, toward the end of March, Mr. Dutton drove the wagon to Kalaupapa and asked to see Mother Mary Ann. "How is Father Damien?" was her first question after greeting her guest. "It is about him that I have come." Mr. Dutton, known usually as Brother Joseph, sighed. "He is failing rapidly and has been forced to stay in bed," Brother Joseph said. Mother Mary Ann nodded. "I thought that would come soon," she said. "But the trouble is, he has no bed. He lies on the floor with not even a sheet or blanket to protect his pain-racked body." "Oh, mercy! We can't have that." Mother Mary Ann glanced at the road and saw the wagon. "Sister will show you where you can get a cot. Call the yard man to help you get it on the wagon. I'll collect some sheets and blankets in the meantime. And pillows?" "He has none." "Then I'll pick up 2 of them also." Brother Joseph was soon jolting down the road with bed and bedding, but when Father Damien was told of the efforts to make him comfortable he protested. "Bed, sheets, pillow?" he croaked. "Not for me. There are poor people who really need them. I can't have such luxury when others do without." "But Mother Mary Ann will be disappointed." Father Wendelin, who was there, knew that only such an argument would have weight. "She wants to do something for you, and that was all she could think of." So rather than disappoint anyone, the dying priest allowed himself the luxury of a simple bed. On the morning of April 15, 1889, he died. Mother Mary Ann, taking Sister Leopoldina with her, hurried over to prepare the body for burial, to help plan for the funeral. The patients were dazed with grief and hopelessness. The first person to treat them with love and compassion had left them, and they did not know where to turn. Father Damien had often said that he wanted to be buried under the pandanus tree, which had been his first home. So the grave was dug there, and after Mass on April 16 his body was laid to its final bed. Suddenly Mother Mary Ann was swamped with new problems. Not only was there confusion in the Molokai settlement now that its head was gone, but there were changes in Honolulu. The Board of Health decided that Branch Hospital was too great an eyesore to have near the city, so they tore it down and moved it some miles down the beach. The Kapiolani Home for Children still had to be operated. "Mother, shall we do this?" "Mother, what would you think of that?" "The Board of Health has decided." From morning to night, day after day, Mother Mary Ann was bombarded with questions, confronted with problems to be decided. One of the Sisters became worried. A visiting doctor had been certain that no one could work with the lepers, nursing and caring for them, without contracting leprosy himself. One day Sister could stand the worry no longer. "Mother, what will you do with me if I become a leper?" she said. Mother's great eyes studied her calmly. "You will never become a leper," she said firmly. "I know we are all exposed, but I know, too, that God has called us for this work." Sister nodded. Already the serene sureness of Mother Mary Ann's voice was having effect. "If we are prudent," Mother went on, "and we do our duty, He will protect us. And remember, you will never be a leper, nor will any Sister of our Order." Sister would have been as likely to challenge the words of a prophet of old as to doubt Mother when she spoke so. She went back to her work, her mind at rest. In May 2 of the Sisters who had worked in Hawaii came to Molokai to help carry the load there. Sister Irene and Sister Crescentia, as they boarded the little ship that was to carry them, noticed that the Bishop and Father Leonor were at the pier saying goodbye to a priest. He was a slim man, almost frail in appearance, whose skin, even though tan from outdoor living, seemed still to have a sickly cast. The trip was stormy, as usual, and longer than it should have been. The Sisters were ready to disembark almost as soon as the ship was secure, but the man was ashore before them. They just got a glimpse of him walking down the road that led to the doctor's house. The next morning one of the Sisters left the convent to make her rounds of the sick. She had not seen the man who had crossed from Honolulu with the Sisters. but from their description she recognized him in the man now leaning on the fence. "Good morning," she said. "Is there anything I can do for you?" The stranger's sunken, dark-ringed eyes lightened with a charming smile. "I was just admiring your cheerful home," he said. "It is the pleasantest place in the settlement." Sister was pleased. She, like everyone else who was able, had worked to carry out Mother Mary Ann's plans for landscaping. It was nice to have the results appreciated. Before she could express her thanks, the man spoke again. "I would like to see the Reverend Mother," he said hesitantly, then added hastily, "that is, if it is not too early." Sister laughed. She couldn't help it. "Too early?" she said. "At 10 in the morning? Why, Mother has been busy for the last 5 hours or so." The man laughed a little too. "I didn't mean just that," he explained. "I just thought that perhaps later in the day she might have fewer duties, more time for visitors." "Mother is never without duties awaiting her," Sister said seriously, "but she is never too busy to welcome a guest. Come, I'll show you where her office is." She had no notion that, as she trotted briskly ahead, the man who followed her was Robert Louis Stevenson. The author and the mother talked. Each brilliant mind struck sparks from the other, and the range of their subjects was wide. Each found the other stimulating to talk with, each admired and respected the other. But Mother's free time was not unlimited, and the visit had to end. The next day Stevenson was back, this time to call on the girls. He brought with him a croquet set which he set up with the idea of introducing the game to the home. At first he could get no players. The girls found it hard to believe that a non-leper should come just to bring them pleasure, but the charm of his personality and a little gentle urging from Mother Mary Ann got a game started, and what fun they had! As the sun climbed high, Mother became worried. Stevenson, she knew, was a sick man. He had come to the South Seas in search of health, but he certainly wouldn't find it romping and shouting in the noonday heat. She went out to him. "It isn't wise for you to exert yourself so," she said, "particularly in this heat. In your condition it could be very dangerous." Stevenson's eyes were even more sunken and his lips were bloodless, but his smile was radiant. "You have some very clever young ladies here, Mother Mary Ann," he said. "They'll play better than I do before the end of my visit." He wiped his brow. "I've had a very pleasant morning," he went on, "and I'll be here tomorrow afternoon to play some more." He arrived about 2 the next day and found the yard filled with eager players. Mother Mary Ann urged him to wait a while and gave a great many sound reasons for postponing the game. But though he listened courteously, his eyes kept straying to the croquet field, and as soon as he could he flew out there. Mother watched the game with worried eyes. She saw the world famous man so excited about his game with the leper girls that he became exhausted and flung himself on the ground to rest between turns. "What can I do, Sister?" Mother asked. "How could we manage if he had a hemorrhage here?" "I don't know what to suggest, Mother. If he did collapse we couldn't give him the proper medicine, food, or care." To the nuns' relief the game came to an end, but not before every girl had learned to play. And when he went back to Honolulu, Robert Louis Stevenson sent a magnificent piano to his friends at Bishop Home. The girls would rather have had their delightful playmate back, and found it hard to shake off their sadness at his going. But before long they had something more immediate to occupy their minds. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of The Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. The plot. It is simply beautiful, the devotion of that girl for her mother. Sister Leopoldina watched Ah Kai as she helped her mother across the yard to a bench, where she seated the old lady carefully. Ah Lin's case was much more advanced than that of her daughter. In fact, a casual glance at the graceful young girl disclosed no trace of illness. "That is one of the things I admire most about the Chinese," Mother Mary Ann answered. "Their religion teaches respect for age and particularly for parents and grandparents, and I've never seen a young person fail to observe the teaching." Both nuns looked thoughtful. They were wishing, no doubt, that members of other faiths were equally careful about following their rules. Ah Kai made her mother as comfortable as she could. Then, bowing respectfully, she turned to start working in the garden. Plants grew rapidly in that warm spot, and already nature had repaired most of the damage done by the devil storm. More little trees had been brought down from the hills, and Mother Mary Ann had written to friends asking for saplings and seeds. Bishopholm, she was determined, would become a beauty spot. The weather and many of the girls helped in her plan. Mother went about her duties, and they were many. To housekeeping, supervising the school, keeping in touch with Honolulu and Maui, now assistance to Mr. Dutton had been added. Not all of the lepers of Molokai were Catholics by any means, but there were many, and teaching catechism to those who were had largely devolved on the Sisters. Now a new problem was bothering Mother Mary Ann. Akayan and her mother had been in the colony only a few days when her grace and charm caught the eye and heart of a young Chinese man. He wanted to marry her. Old Ah Lin had not much longer to live, but the young man promised that she should have the best of care while she stayed. The young suitor was well off, but that was the trouble. His income was made by the sale of opium and liquor and from gambling games run in his home. Mother Mary Ann sighed deeply. "I don't, of course, have the power to forbid the marriage," she reminded herself, "although Akayan would heed me to some extent." But, she wondered, would it not be better for the girl to have a home and a devoted husband than to live out a lonely, frustrated life in the Bishop home? The young man, despite his way of earning a living, seemed good enough. But the men who came to his place, they were something quite different. But the girl and her mother both wanted the marriage, so the wedding took place. Akayan was mistress of the little house, and Ah Lin was treated like a queen. The young husband kept his family quite apart from the business, and his wife had only the most glowing reports of his kindness when she came to call on the Sisters and her friends among the girls. The visits were frequent and joyous. She hurried to report on each small culinary triumph, to show each little gift she received. It encouraged the girls to see one of their number so well established. "She does seem very content," said Mother Mary Ann. Sister agreed. Then, for no seeming reason, Akayan's visits grew less frequent, and when she came she was no longer joyous. Something, it was evident, weighed on her mind. One afternoon Mother Mary Ann drove over to Kalawao to consult with Mr. Dutton on some of his problems. There had been serious disorders among the men since Father Damien's death, and, though things had quieted down, it took constant effort to keep them so. Mother had hardly gone when Akayan appeared. "Mother isn't here. She'll be sorry to have missed you," said Sister Leopoldina, "but the girls will enjoy a visit." "I didn't come to see Mother nor to see the girls," said Akayan soberly. "I want to talk with you." There was something rather frightening in the girl's voice. "Come, let's sit down on the veranda," Sister suggested. "No, I can't stay but a few minutes. I have come to tell you something. Then I must hurry back." She hesitated, gulped, and then the story rushed out. "Some days ago a party came to play cards with my husband. Nakipai was with them." "Oh, oh." Sister knew Nakipai as a dangerous troublemaker. "Whenever Nakipai and his crowd come to gamble at my house, my husband tells me to go spend the evening with my friends. He thinks it is not good I should be home when that crowd is there." For that much let's be grateful, Sister thought. "I had a feeling that they were up to no good," Akayan continued. "So instead of going calling, I crept up outside the house. I crouched under the window of the room where they were drinking and gambling. It was awful." Sister waited, wondering. Nakipai said that Mother Mary Ann was making things bad for the men on the island. She was spoiling everything for those who wanted to enjoy themselves, and she encouraged the priests and brothers at Kalawao to do the same. "And?" Sister was now full of apprehension. She could hardly wait for the girl to catch her breath. "Nakipai says if anyone is to be happy here, drinking, gambling, opium smoking, he means, if anyone is to be happy, Mother must be killed." Sister gasped as if she had been struck. It was worse even than she had imagined. "Your husband?" she asked. "Oh no. My husband does not like the plan at all. He has no part in it. But that dreadful plot was made in his house, and if anything happens he will be in trouble. Oh, Sister, he is so good to my mother and me." Sister tried to think what might be done, but she couldn't. Her mind was churning, full of half-formed plans and incomplete thoughts. "What can we do?" she asked helplessly. "I have done it," Aunt said serenely. "I wanted you to know, but don't tell Mother. She has worries enough." "What have you done?" "I have told the girls. They are all prepared." "Prepared for what?" "Prepared for 3 nights from now. I heard Nakepais said, 'At 12 o'clock the next night, the moon is dark, we will go.'" "That is 3 nights from now." "What do they plan?" "They are not to meet at our house. They will come one by one and hide themselves in the grounds here. At midnight Nakepai will knock on the door. When Mother opens it, they will seize and gag her so she can't scream, and carry her away before anyone can see them and know who they are." "But Mother will know," Sister protested. "Mother will soon be dead," Aunt explained tersely. She paused a moment, then turning to go she added an encouraging sentence. "But do not worry, Sister, and do not tell Mother. The girls all love her. They will take care of everything." Sister did not tell Mother, although she was not sure about the propriety of her act. But Aunt had spoken with such certainty! In times past, when wars between the islanders were common, women had fought alongside their men. They were equally skillful with knife and spear and exulted in battle just as their men did. Mother Mary Ann, during the next few days, was vaguely aware of unusual activities among the girls. "What are you doing with that meat cleaver?" she asked of one. "Fixing it so it will chop better," was the answer. Later she saw a girl honing a carving knife on a stone in the yard. "The knife is dull," the girl explained. The thought crossed Mother's mind that it was odd that every cutting or chopping tool in the place had lost its edge at the same time, but she supposed such things happened. And she had many things on her mind. Sister Leopoldina was unaware of what the girls' plan was. The girls retired as usual on the night when the moon was dark, but shortly after 11 they climbed stealthily from their beds. As silent as shadows they stole out of the house and took up their appointed stations around the convent. They did not make any effort to conceal themselves from anyone who might approach. Shortly before 12 the first of Nakepai's men arrived. Although there was no moon, the sky was filled with stars which sent down a glow. The men were startled to see the glow reflected from a heavy knife held by a determined woman. Bewildered, they ducked behind some bushes and crawled to the back of the house, where other men were to await them. There the female sentry was armed with a meat cleaver. A group of men falling on a single, defenseless nun was one thing; facing a furious group of armed women was another. Consultation was needed. The early arrivals withdrew down the road and stopped their fellows from blundering into trouble. One or two, who could not believe that their plot had been uncovered, stole up to take a look for themselves. They were convinced and shaken when they rejoined the crowd, and being discreet, they decided that the kidnapping of Mother Mary Ann had better be abandoned. Shortly before dawn the girls returned their weapons to their proper places. They were asleep in their beds when morning came. Sister Leopoldina smiled happily when she awakened them. "Well, we had no trouble last night, did we?" she asked. "Did you expect trouble, Sister?" "No." Sister was not sure how much she was supposed to know about the plot. Anyway, we didn't have any. The girls agreed, and Mother Mary Ann had no clue as to why some of them seemed particularly tired that day. The days passed. Mother Mary Ann's work grew heavier. She remembered her promise to Father Damian that she would help with his boys, but the trip from Bishop Home to Kalawao was a long and wearying one. The Board of Health supplied her with a horse and wagon to commute in. After a struggle for mastery between the half trained horse and the man who drove, travel between the settlements was easier. Mother washed and dressed the sores of the sick, prepared their medicine, and taught them how and when to take it. She appointed sisters to help Mr. Dutton in teaching the leper boys, and she won the affection of most of the people who knew her. The passage of the years could be read in the trees around the Bishop Home. They were tall and beautiful now, casting a gracious shade in the heat of the day and protecting buildings and grounds when the winds came. With her own hands Mother Mary Ann had gathered rocks and stones to fill holes in the road and to construct walks. "You'll kill yourself, Mother, if you work so hard," friends protested. "No, I won't," Mother assured them. "And when I do die there will be others to take my place. I didn't come here to be idle." Idle she certainly was not. Her long, busy days started before sunrise. They continued until 1 the next morning. Her increasing paper work could be done only after all those under her care had gone to sleep. King Kalakaua died in January 1891. His heartbroken widow left the palace never to return. In the going of Queen Kapiolani, Mother Mary Ann and her charges lost a kind and devoted friend. The sister of the late king ascended the throne as Queen Liliuokalani. She brought political upheaval with her. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of The Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. The Garden. Although Mother Mary Ann was not concerned in the politics of the islands, she could not help but be affected by them. The king had been a forward-looking man who worked well with his legislature. He was interested in the welfare of his people and willing, within reason, to listen to what they had to say. His sister was quite different. She wanted a return to the absolute monarchy of Hawaiian rulers of old. She would appoint a man to a task, then change her mind about him, and with no warning he would high-handedly be replaced. There was no stability, no continuity in any government post. These changes of personnel often made things hard for Mother. An overseer of the island would be appointed, stay just long enough to be bothersome, and then, when there was a change of ideas in Honolulu, the overseer would be changed too. But work at the Bishop home had to go on no matter what else changed. By 1891, the year Queen Liliuokalani took the throne, the grounds around the home were splendid in their trees, colorful gardens, and luxuriant bushes. Many of the girls and women who had been apathetic about the project when it was started now were in it heart and soul. Sometimes smaller or more handicapped girls were ruled out by larger, abler ones. "She steps on more plants than she grows, Mother," one older girl said angrily as the little one wept a protest. "But she doesn't mean to," Mother argued. She was always on the side of the helpless. "Can you explain that to the flower, Mother?" The girl seemed serious, not saucy, as she asked. Mother's eyes lighted with laughter, and her engaging smile pulled at the corners of her mouth. "No, I'm afraid I can't." She paused for a moment. "Oh, I have a fine idea." The small girl shut off her sobs to listen. "When Sister is busy in the kitchen, if she looks out the window she doesn't see a single flower. Imagine, no flowers at all!" For a moment she was afraid that her talents as a dramatic actress might have been too great, for it looked as if the very little girl was going to dissolve into tears again at the thought of Sister with no garden to look at. So Mother hurried along. "Wouldn't it be nice to make a garden there?" she asked. "Could I do it?" "Yes, you and your friends can have that for your special garden," Mother assured the child. "I have some seeds a friend sent me. I don't know what the flowers are like. You and your friends can make a nice surprise for us all." The older girl, satisfied now that her work would not be interfered with, smiled and offered assistance. "Some of us big ones will dig it up for you if you need help," she said. "No, this is our garden. Mother said so." The little one now had much of the protective attitude that had upset her in the other. "We'll do it all ourselves." Belatedly she remembered some of what she had been taught. "Thank you," she called as she ran off to collect her friends. The gardens were at their loveliest one day when one of the superintendents approached Mother Mary Ann. With no preamble he stated the reason for his visit. "In April," he said, "there will be an inspection of superintendents' houses. A prize is to be given for the most beautifully kept grounds. I want that prize." Mother waited with some curiosity for him to continue. When he did not, she suggested, "You would like a few of my plants?" "Why, yes," he said, as if the question hardly needed asking. "I'll send men for them. The visitors will wonder how I ever got such a fine garden so fast." Smiling happily, he turned and left. I wonder if he realized that most of the loveliest trees and shrubs and flowers were sent to me by my friends. Sister Leopoldina was angry. "That kind of man wouldn't care," she sputtered. The effrontery of him! Coming for our plantings so he can win a prize." "Well, I told him he might take some. We do have a great many, Sister. I'm sure we can spare a few." The two nuns went off to the tasks awaiting them. They were both busy and completely unaware of what was going on in their yard. Then suddenly Sister came flying into Mother's office. "Mother, there are several wagons going down the road, and they are taking the whole yard with them." "The whole yard? What do you mean, Sister?" "Well, most of it. Just look." Mother went to the veranda. The place looked as if a new and more vigorous devil storm had been through it. Flowers, the finest shrubs, most of the small trees, and even a few of the larger ones, all had been taken up and carted away. It was desolate again. "Hours of work, expense to your friends, loving care from the girls." Sister Leopoldina couldn't frame sentences that would express her feelings. "I'm sorry for the girls' sakes," Mother agreed, "but we can make it lovely again. Things grow fast, you know, here in the tropics." Sister might have protested further, but Mother raised a gentle, silencing hand. "We must find excuses for ignorance," she said. It was after supper when the telephone rang. Sister Leopoldina answered. It was the superintendent. "Sister," he said in his pompous, dictatorial manner, "will you tell Mother, please, that she didn't send any alligator pear trees?" "And you want some?" With a mighty effort of the will, Sister kept her voice courteous. "Some, Sister. Some? I want them all." A slow flush crept up Sister's cheeks. Her eyes glittered. "You'll get none," she said, and slammed down the telephone. Having done it, she shuddered. The day had been full of exasperations. She just couldn't take a reprimand from Mother on top of everything else. Yet she knew that her self discipline had slipped badly and that she had been uncivil. Slowly she turned to Mother, ready for her scolding. Mother's hands half covered her face and she was shaking. For a moment Sister's heart stopped. Had she upset Mother so badly? Then the merry eyes were uncovered and she saw Mother's face. The shaking was from laughter. "Sister," she chuckled, "how did you dare to speak so?" "The insolence of the man overcame me." Sister was half laughing, half angry. "It's not bad enough that he has destroyed the lovely garden, but now he impudently demanded all the alligator pear trees. All, Mother!" Mother shook her head sadly. "It is strange how thoughtless some people are," was all she said. Once again Sister marveled. Threats on her life, raids on her property, Mother took everything in her stride. The flame of love was constant in her heart, and nothing would make it waver, much less put it out. The uneasy situation in Honolulu would have discouraged a lesser soul. There Queen Liliuokalani became more and more difficult to deal with. She would make promises and break them, would make deals with private persons in the name of the government. She largely ignored the legislatures. At last it was plain that heavy American investments in the islands were in danger. After some negotiations, in 1894 the islands were declared a republic, and Sanford Dole was elected the first president. While this was going on, Mother Mary Ann received first more, then less help, assistance going up and down with the rise and fall of political groups. People interested in politics in Honolulu could not be expected to expend much thought on the lepers of Molokai. To give them credit, the government intended to be kind. But so little was known of the disease, so little understood about its control and treatment. Sometimes, too, the weather played an unpleasant part in Mother's problems. There was, for instance, the time when storms prevented the supply ship from putting in at Kalaupapa. The staple food in the Hawaiians' diet is poi, made from the pounded root of the taro plant. Without poi, no matter how much else is offered, they do not feel they have had a meal. Molokai did not raise enough taro for its needs, so the ship from Honolulu brought it in. But the ship could not put in to unload. The first night there was enough to feed all the people, but when a second day of storm followed, the people became hungry. "We have no food," they complained to Mother. "But the Sisters have prepared a good meal for you," she protested. There was a moment of silence. "We have no poi. We have no food." Mother had the feeling that when they got hungry enough they would eat the good meals offered them. But she did not know her people. If they had poi, they had a meal. No poi, no meal. The storm continued for a third day, and Mother began to worry. A prolonged fast would be dangerous for her patients. Yet there seemed no way to break it. Fortunately, before things grew really serious, the wind died down. "Now we can eat!" Those who lived in little houses of their own hurried to draw rations of poi. The girls in the hospital could hardly wait until supper time. Mother watched them with amused exasperation. Tradition certainly died hard in these people whom she loved so much. She must work out some way of providing against a repetition of this near disaster. Thinking of food brought her mind on an obvious train of thought to the kitchen. She must ask for a new stove. The ancient, cross-grained one they had would try anyone's patience. It was so non-cooperative. If the cook needed quick heat, it smoldered and smoked. If something required long, slow cooking, the impetuous stove raced ahead and charred everything entrusted to it. It was too small, anyway, for the amount of work required of it. Easter was coming, always a day of great celebration, but especially among the lepers. Probably it was because they lived so close to the grave that the story of the resurrection was especially dear to them. Whatever the reason, they were planning a great feast on that day. Mother decided to see if she could have a stove in time to permit the Sisters to make their contribution to the gala affair. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of The Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. The Easter Feast. Mother Mary Ann paused for a moment and looked out at the ocean. It always stirred her with its power and its vastness, although she still thought of it as something it was better not to be on, to admire from a firm place on land. Yet she knew its kindness, too. It provided food, interesting activities for those who liked to fish, and sport for those of her girls who could walk as far as the little sandy beach, which was safe for wading and bathing. The girls gathered shells along the shore, and were always delighted when they could bring her a double handful of pretty and unusual ones. "God never repeats Himself, does He?" Mother would marvel, as she turned over hundreds of shells and found no two identical. This particular day she was most interested in the sea's behavior, for today, when the ship came, the stove would be aboard. There had been so much talk about this new addition to the kitchen that she wondered just what the girls expected. She had already been called on to rule in disputes. "It will so cook by itself." "It will not. How can it?" "I don't know, but I heard Sister say that her work would be over when the stove came." "Sister didn't mean that." "Of course she did. Sister doesn't say what she doesn't mean. It will so cook by itself. Won't it, Mother?" Mother Mary Ann certainly didn't want to discredit Sister, yet Hawaiian children were all too ready to believe in magic and ghosts and such. She spoke with care. "You understand that Sister will still have to make the fire and watch it, to prepare the food and put it on, or in, the stove, but this one will burn more evenly." She then gave a simple explanation of drafts and dampers and combustion. Fortunately the girls were so interested they forgot any disappointment they might have felt in learning that the stove didn't prepare a meal without human aid. The story was just about done when a new distraction offered itself. A sling from a crane on the ship was seen to contain a great, shiny black mass of metal. "The stove! It's coming ashore!" Together they ran to the landing to greet it. A score or more people were already there for the great occasion. Boys and men had come from Kalawao, people who lived in their own houses in Molokai, several girls from the Bishop home. Mother and Lily, who was unable to walk so far, watched from the veranda. Men on board the ship tugged on ropes, and the sling with its precious freight rose majestically. The crane was swung slowly. This was the crucial moment. There was a murmur of excitement among the watchers, then a gasp of dismay. The weight of the stove had shifted and it was slipping in its cradle. "Oh, Mother!" Lily was shaking with fright. "Mother, what can we do?" Nervous excitement was bad for leprosy cases. That knowledge disturbed Mother, that and the awareness that the land shelved off very fast where the ship was. If the stove were to fall, there would be no hope at all of recovery. The men on the hoist lines had a problem. If they were to reverse the motion of the hoist and try to bring the stove back to the ship, that change might be enough to topple it out. Yet, at the moment, it didn't look as if it would ride the rest of the way. "Mother, I'm going to say a prayer," said Lizzie. Mother hardly heard the child. She was too intent on watching the skill with which the men maneuvered the crane. So slowly that the movement was almost imperceptible, the sling with the stove (always capitalized in the girl's speech) was moved over the dock. Gently rope was paid out, the precious weight lowered. It was safe ashore. A shout went up from the onlookers and from Mother a sigh of relief. The men made quite a program of getting the monster onto a wagon. It was a triumphal procession from the dock to the cookhouse. Only the slightest dismay followed discovery that the stove was much too large to go through the door. "We'll take out a wall," they said calmly. And that was what they did. The stove was in. The Sisters started planning what they could bake for the Easter feast. Non-lepers from Kalawao started late on Friday to dig a huge pit. On Saturday they put in kindling and hardwood, over which was spread a layer of great flat stones. "Are they going to fry meat on those stones?" Sister asked one of the girls. "Oh no, Sister. The food is baked, and it is delicious." As often as they could steal a minute, the Sisters watched the preparations. But those moments did not come often, for on top of the inhumanly hard schedule with which they were already burdened, they were baking. The stove deserved its capitals. It poured out bread and cake and cookies for the feast, and when the Sisters had prepared their contribution for the celebration at home, they made over 100 small cakes to send to Kalawao. "It doesn't seem possible that you could do so much," Mother Mary Ann said. But somehow or other they did, and as each bulletin came telling of the preparation of the feast, it was shared with the others. "They killed a hog and cut it into small pieces while the stones were heating," one Sister reported. "The girls have wrapped each piece together with a piece of salt salmon and a ti leaf." "What comes next?" asked Mother. As soon as the flames of the wood under the stones died down, they laid the little bundles of meat on the hot stones. The stones glowed almost like the embers beneath them when the fish and pork packages were placed and surrounded by large sweet potatoes. Then long banana leaves covered them. Wet bags to make even more steam topped the leaves, and a clay covering over all sealed the heat inside. "Now it must cook for 6 or 7 hours," explained the tall Polynesian who directed the affair. But hardly had the men completed tucking in the food than suddenly, as happens in the tropics, the rain came. Moment by moment it increased. Cold, slashing rain came down, a watery curtain that penetrated the clay and cooled the food in the pit. The storm stopped as suddenly as it started, and the men opened the pit at one end. The food was not cooking, and the rain was beginning again. Determinedly, the men ran to a small clump of trees and chopped away long, straight poles. These they used for the framework of a hastily built shelter over the pit. With the rain pouring down again, they opened the pit and started patiently reconstructing the entire affair. The food now would cook all night. The Sisters, as excited as anyone else by now, woke quickly when there was a pounding on the convent door at 4 the next morning. They dressed quickly and hurried off to Mass. Mother Mary Ann couldn't find it in her heart to protest when some of the girls seemed distracted at intervals during the service. Devout, they were happy because Christ had left His tomb, but they were human too, and a feast was waiting for their coming. The whole congregation, Sisters and girls, moved from the church to the spot of the feast. The cakes and cookies, the nuns' contribution, were owed and awed about before the girls seated themselves in a circle on the ground. Their eyes were wide and their laughter gay as they waited to be served. "It is wonderful their capacity for enjoyment," said Mother Mary Ann as the Sisters walked back to the convent. "I doubt that I would have their courage in their circumstances." It never occurred to her that she, voluntarily, was living in the same surroundings, seeing the same dreadful sights, and facing problems the patients would never know. True, she did not share their fatal disease, but she was beginning to feel the onset of an equally unconquerable ailment — old age. Breathing was hard for her at times, and a bad cough racked her, but she had too many duties to have time for attention to herself. After the nuns breakfasted, those who were not going to attend patients began decorating the dining room. The stove was being called on again. Cakes and cookies had gone from it for the noon meal. For the festive supper it must work again. It was Easter. The Lord had risen. Celebration must be joyous indeed. In 1898 Hawaii became part of the United States, and in 1900 was formally organized as a territory. "I suppose it's silly, Mother," said Sister Crescentia, "but although we are just as far from Syracuse as we ever were, I feel nearer somehow." Mother's eyes twinkled. "Is it silly, Sister? If it is, there are two sillies, because I feel just the same." "Mr. Dutton hoisted his flag today," said Sister Leopoldina. "His boys are quite excited at being Americans. He has told them so many stories of the country." There was a moment's silence. The hands of both nuns were busy with the interminable mending. Their minds, too, seemed to have been busy with similar thoughts. "Perhaps now doctors will be " Mother began. Sister spoke at the same moment. "Medicines and dressings should be " They stopped. At Sister's nod, Mother Marian continued. "Our minds were tuned, weren't they, Sister? With the United States Government in charge, our people should have better care." A coughing spell stopped Mother. "And perhaps you will be able to spare yourself a little." Sister spoke anxiously. "How about yourself, Sister?" Mother's smile was as warm and lovely as ever. "I do not notice you resting very often." Indeed, there was little rest for any of the Sisters. With the hoisting of the Stars and Stripes it was true that food was more certain to arrive, that medical supplies were to be better, and that good doctors would come with new and better ideas. But the nuns still worked harder than anyone should have expected a human being to do. In August of 1903 the girls wanted to go for a walk in the Waukulla Valley. There they could gather guavas and mountain apples for the table and bouquets over our flowers. Mother Mary Ann was the only nun free, so she went with them. The day started clear and still, heavy with the peculiar breathless heat that comes to the islands. Mother was, as always, gay and pleasant. But as the sun climbed up the sky and sent its rays straight down on Molokai, she found breathing more and more difficult. Even when the lush trees shut off the sun, there was no respite. Mother Mary Ann sat on a fallen tree and let the girls roam the woods, staying within sound of her voice. When she called them to start home, they would have made their usual protest, but the sight of her pale face and bloodless lips frightened them. They were very quiet on the homeward trek. She had 2 lung hemorrhages not long afterward. It was 20 years since she and the Sisters had arrived in Honolulu, 15 since they had come to Molokai. It would be hard to see the dismal place that they had taken over and the green and beautiful home which now housed them and their nearly 100 patients. "How much longer will God let me continue this work?" Mother wondered. End of section 13. Chapter 14 of The Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. The flame is quenched. In 1905 there were 907 lepers in the colony of Molokai. The Kapiolani home in Honolulu had 45 girls. The hospital on Maui was doing its work well, under the care of Sister Magdalena, whose early days in the Order had been guided by Mother Mary Ann. If she had the time and inclination, Mother Mary Ann could have looked with satisfaction on the pain eased, the lives brightened because of her. If she had been impelled to give credit for the work she would have given it to her Sisters. The thought of the amazing work they had done, not only in caring for souls and bodies, but the heavy manual labor. They had cleaned and scrubbed, they had made gardens and roads, and when the Board of Health had moved too slowly, Sister Benedicta had got some salvage lumber and with help from 2 of her patients had herself put up a needed building. "Sister Benedicta must replace me when I am gone," Mother Mary Ann would say. "She is strong enough for the load." But the nuns did not want to think of Mother leaving them. It was she who had accepted the challenge of the work, she who had led the first group half around the world to work on the island. Every forward step had been taken at her direction. How could they go on without her? Mother's face was wrinkled now, and her step not as light and quick as it once had been. But in her heart the same warm flame of love burned, the same desire to be of service. The Sisters tried to make her take things a little easier, to rest for a while each afternoon, for example. She would obediently go for her nap, but hardly would she lie down than a little girl would come to the door. "Where's Mother? I want Mother." "Mother is resting, dear," Sister would say. "What is it you want? Can't I take care of it?" "No, I want Mother." Mother Mary Ann always said she "slept with one ear open." So she would appear on the veranda in answer to the call. "I want to show you the picture I drew," the child might say, or "I have no thread to make lace." The Sisters would protest, "Mother, she could have shown me the picture." Mother's lovely smile, which she never lost, would flash. "Ah, but Sister, it was me she wanted to show it to," she would say. There was just no way to see that Mother rested, it seemed. Electric light came to the Island, and American efficiency brought modern buildings and better ways, but the basic ingredient in caring for the patients, the most valuable medication, still was love. In 1914 there were reports of trouble in Europe, of war there. To the girls under their care the nuns taught a prayer for the men in battle. Pictures of the little Bohemian village home of her ancestors came to Mother Mary Ann's mind. She wondered what was happening in the quaint little streets bordered by houses with sharp pitched roofs. But she could not dwell on far off lands. She was feeling her age very much, and, as she pointed out to her Mother General, she and several of the Sisters had been in the Islands for 31 years. On what they had done, what they had seen in those years, she made no comment. In September of 1917 Mother Mary Ann asked to be relieved of her duties as Superior. Sister Benedicta came from the Capellani home to take the charge. Mother was failing rapidly, physically, but she was still able to take some responsibility, to get about a little, though it was hard, and she still kept her ability to see the humorous side of things. Mother was still amazed by the wireless telegraphy. It was possible now to send a message through the air, to ask a question of Honolulu, and get an answer from there in less time than it used to take to write a letter. The world was moving so fast. If only human nature would perfect itself to keep up with the things it invented! The doctor secured a comfortable wheelchair for Mother. It delighted her, but she was diffident about going for rides in it. "You work so hard," she protested when Sister Leopoldina wanted to take her out for the air. "You shouldn't be pushing me about. Go and rest." "But Mother," Sister was disappointed, "I want to take you out." "Really?" Mother herself was the soul of truth, and she had the childlike simplicity which marks true greatness. She did not argue. Each day she was brought to the dining room for meals. She could go to the chapel, be really a part of the community life which was so dear to her. From the veranda she could see the ocean which had so often frightened and distressed her. It would not bother her again. She could hear the wind in the trees she had planted, giants now, bending protectively over the ground below. The poppies still rose grandly, but their greenness no longer was cut suddenly by a barren thumb of land. Grass and flowers were lush around Kalaupapa. Many of the trees and flowers were the gifts of faraway people. People are kind and good, Mother Mary Ann thought to herself. One needs only to give them a chance to be generous. When the children saw their beloved mother on the veranda or being wheeled about the yard in her chair, they would run to be near her. A smile from her would make the day bright for them. But as spring ended and summer began, in 1918, they would sometimes draw away frightened, because they saw in her face a fact which she was aware of. Death was not far away, and they feared death. Mother Mary Ann never tried to keep the girls with her longer than they wanted to stay. She loved them enough to let them go. Even the most disfigured face was beautiful to her, for in each she saw Christ, and her love for Him was beyond all measure. If anyone had called her heroic, she would have been either amused or amazed. Christ had paid her the compliment of calling her to serve Him. It was little enough to say "Thank you" by caring for His afflicted ones. Sister Crescentia spent the night with Mother, watching and caring for her. But, of course, the fact that she was night nurse did not mean that she could sleep during the day. Her regular duties awaited her then. "Can't I stay with you a few nights, Mother?" Sister Leopoldina asked. "No, it would make Sister Crescentia unhappy," Mother said gently. "But I'll tell you what you can do." "Oh, what, Mother?" Sister was eager for a chance to be of service. "You can take me for a nice ride on the veranda. I feel the need of fresh air." Breathing was growing constantly more difficult for Mother. Her tortured lungs could not get enough oxygen. They made one trip up and down the 40-foot veranda. Sister turned the chair and was about to start again. "That will do, Sister," Mother said gently. "Take me in now." Sister's heart sank. Mother usually wanted several trips. Could this be the end? But some days later a little novice came to visit. "I'd like to take your picture, Mother," she said. Mother Mary Ann had always objected to being photographed. Everyone was surprised when this time she agreed. Her chair was wheeled into the yard. There, under one of the trees she had planted more than a quarter of a century ago, her sisters behind her, her little girls grouped around her, Mother was pictured for the last time. She looked at the trees and gardens, the cottages and main buildings. Lessons were being taught, beautiful lace was being made for sale. A full life, within certain limits, was being lived by her charges. "It's a long time since you've been around to see things, Mother," Sister said. "Shall I take you on a little tour?" "Not today, thank you, Sister." Mother's voice was thin. "You better take me in now." "I'd like to see Sister Magdalena," said Mother one day not long after the picture taking. "She is one of my 'girls,' you know." "She wrote not long ago, Mother," Sister reminded her. "I know, but I'd like to talk with her about the school and hospital at Maui." Mother seldom expressed a wish for anything. The Sisters knew, too, that Sister Magdalena would be eager to see her and assist in caring for her during her last days. No ship was due to stop at Kalaupapa, however, for some days. "I'll wire to Honolulu," the doctor suggested, "and have the Claudine stop for a passenger at Kaunakake. One of the Sisters can board her there and go on to Maui." Kaunakake was the other side of the Pali. The stern 2,500-foot cliff had only one footpath across it, a path made dangerous by falling stones and sudden storms. But it was the route which would lead to gratifying one of Mother Mary Ann's few desires. So Sister Benedicta set out on the journey. It was a grim, exhausting trip, and once over the Pali, there were still 7 miles to go before she reached the harbor. Since the Claudine was a ship of some size, it could not come into the landing, but stood offshore to await its passenger. Now what? Sister Benedicta wondered. Was it possible that she had climbed and descended the Pali only to be balked now? Yet the gleam of the ship's lights through the darkness seemed to her to be a world away. She found a Japanese sampan willing to take her out. A sampan is a picturesque little boat and quite seaworthy, but it has one vital disadvantage, one of which Sister Benedicta was quite conscious. Its decks were flat and with no railing at all. The seas were only normally rough, but it seemed to Sister that each roll would send her spinning into the dark waters. There were automobiles on Maui now, and the roads were quite different from the ones over which Mother Mary Ann had jolted. But distance ate up time, and there was little time left, Sister knew. The two nuns, Sister Benedicta and Magdalena, repeated the trip: the ship, the sampan, and the Pali. They reached Kalaupapa in time for Mass. Mother seemed better. She still went to the chapel in her wheelchair. She still was brought to the dining room, though she ate almost nothing, and she still enjoyed being taken out on the veranda. On the afternoon of August 9th she was taken out for her airing. "Mother! Mother!" One of the little children ran up to greet her. But the child saw dissolution in Mother Mary Ann's face. She burst into heartbroken sobs and ran away. "Take me to my room now, Sister," said Mother gently. That night she died. The quiet flame which had burned with love for over 80 years was quenched at last. The Sisters of the Third Order of St. Francis still work in the islands, and their work has widened and spread. As Mother Mary Ann foretold, none of them ever contracted leprosy. The warm generosity and desire for service which marked Mother Mary Ann still permeates her Sisters. When the Mother House at Syracuse learned I was writing this book, they were more than gracious than could be imagined. They loaned books, diaries, handwritten records made by Sister Leopoldina, who loved Mother so well. Before me as I write are gifts they sent me. There is a piece of Father Damien's cassock, a piece of silk from a sling Mother Mary Ann had made for his tortured arm. There are 2 pieces of lace that Mother made, one from a vestment, and one sample to show her girls what beauty they could produce. Robert Louis Stevenson, after his visit to Kalaupapa, wrote a poem for Mother Mary Ann, which says everything best: To see the infinite pity of this place, The mangled limb, the devastated face, The innocent sufferers smiling at the rod, A fool were tempted to deny his God. He sees and shrinks, but if he looks again, Lo, beauty springing from the breast of pain! He marks the Sisters on the painful shores, And even a fool is silent and adores. End of chapter 14. End of The Quiet Flame by Eva K. Betz.